Hello to you, dear person reading this story. Make yourself comfortable, grab your best hot chocolate, and let me tell you my story. Know that under my air of a narrator, I'm about to tell you a moment of my life which cannot be erased from my memory. I put a lot of forms in my story to try and forget the fact that I'm about to open up to thousands of strangers on the internet. A very complicated exercise for me. First of all, my presence here comes from the fact that for months, I watched the Let's Not Meet stories, and each time the idea came to me to post here without really having the courage to. Probably for fear of being judged, because of the fear that the person concerned might recognize me, or because of the fear that my story just might not be creepy enough. Small disclaimer, the story that will follow happened 3 years ago now. It's possible that my version is slightly altered, even if I try to be as faithful as possible. I blame my bad memory. Also, I'm French, so pardon any mistakes. Now that you have all the basics, let's get right to the story. I'm currently 19 years old, and this story took place when I was 15 in 11th grade. You should know that in life, I'm a very introverted person, don't have very much self-confidence. I'm very afraid of large crowds and strangers, and I always avoid physical contact. Even my best friends don't do hugs or cheek kisses. For those who don't know, in France, that's how you greet your family or closest friends. At that time, my parents forbade me from using social networks to preserve my innocence. So at the start of high school, I created a Discord account. In my 11th grade, I joined a Discord server full of very nice people. Little by little, I became friends with one of the administrators, and we very quickly became quite close. He told me all about the hardships of having to manage the server. I supported him no matter what, flattered that someone with so much responsibility was interested in a person like me. The months went by, and we got closer and closer. I'd never been happier to have someone paying attention to me. One day, I learned that a school trip was being organized for our class. And guess where we were going? To my friend's town. I told myself that this was a golden opportunity, that I could take advantage of this trip to meet him in person, like my other friends had done with their online friends. I wanted to do the same. I wanted to act like a grown-up. I announced to my friend Baptiste that I would come to his town on a school trip. He was very happy to finally meet me. The weeks went by, and the hour of the trip finally struck. I told Baptiste that I had a visit from his city, but after that I would have 15 minutes of free time which we could see each other for the moment. He told me that suited him just fine. He sent me a picture of his head so that I would be able to recognize him. He also told me that the photo was a bit dated. We exchanged phone numbers as well, because I didn't have internet on mine, and it would be silly if we had no other way of contacting each other to find out where the other was. Level 1. A few hours until the meeting. The day started off well enough. Me, my class, and I take the bus early to be able to reach the city that we're going to visit. The day before, I informed my group of friends that I was going to meet someone from Discord IRL. How happy I was, all those sorts of things. After sharing their concerns with me, they finally told me to just go and enjoy myself. Baptiste also asked me on the way for a photo of me so that he could recognize me when I got there. I was not a big fan of the idea that a stranger had a photo of me. I don't even have any photos of myself because it's something that bothers me a lot. I politely declined his request, explaining that we were in March and it was very warm outside, so I was probably the only person in town wearing a scarf and coat. Our bus finally arrived and parked. We went to go to the meeting point to meet our guide, accompanied by our teachers. We quickly ran across a fun fair. I shared this detail with my beloved Baptiste. In short, we found our guide, and during the explanation of the course of the visit, I received a message. I believe that this moment is when I understood that things were maybe going to take another turn. I opened the message, and what I saw froze my blood. I saw a photo of myself taken from the back, the message saying roughly, "I found you." I can't remember everything verbatim because I changed my phone since then, but I assure you that it was something along those lines. In a reflex, I turned around and noticed that there was no one behind me. Absolutely nobody. I started to have tingles of fear, a rise of anxiety. I sent an answer. Yeah, it's me, but we'll see each other after I visit. At that time, the only thing I could think of was, what the fuck did I just get myself into? We went to the first place to visit for our trip. A few seconds after we stopped, I got another message, another photo of me from behind. Creepy, isn't it? I looked behind me and I still could not see anybody around. My anxiety skyrocketed. I started to shake. My body was screaming at me that I was in danger and begging me to get out of there. We went to the second location. On the way between the first and second place, I saw him on a bench eating an ice cream. As our group passed by him, I took out my phone and sent a message to try and defuse the situation. Hey, I saw you sitting on the bench. Can you wait until we finish the rest of the trip, please? How surprised I was to receive a message immediately. I think you know the rest. When I opened it, it was still a picture of me from my back. At that moment, my friends began to clearly notice that something was wrong. But I didn't actually tell them what it was. I didn't want to ruin the moment we'd have together after, Baptiste and me. Level 2. Can the day get any creepier, please? We then reached the fourth location of our trip. To my surprise, I did not receive a text there. It was actually a real relief. He finally understood that what he was doing was creepy. Let me laugh. Then we come to the fifth place. Still no interaction with him. The idea that maybe it was just a bad start because of weird social interaction comforted me. Maybe he just didn't know how to go about approaching me. Then I turned my head to see with my dismay that Baptiste was embedded in our group, standing just a few meters away from me. Yes, you didn't read that wrong. The guy became encrusted within this group of high school students. Oh, and a little detail that I intentionally left out. In the photo of him that I received, he looked like a 24-year-old. Now think back of taking a picture of a minor who was only 15 and stalking her for 2 hours. We had descended into the depths of creepiness. At the end of the visit to the fifth place, the guide had to leave urgently, but warned us that another guide would come along soon to take over, and we'd have to wait for her in the cathedral square. While waiting, Baptiste sat on a bench a few meters away from me, still enjoying his ice cream while our teachers left us unattended to go buy theirs. Our second guide finally arrived after a while, and we continued on with the tour. During the rest of the visit, this guy followed us everywhere, getting closer and closer to me every time. My friends at that time understood the problem, and tried not to let me die of anguish. At this point, I saw that my history teacher was actually right nearby him, so I sent him another message to dissuade him from continuing to follow me. My teacher is right next to you, you know. You better go, I can tell him. Finally, we reached the last part of the trip. It was a huge relaxation for me because finally I was alone. And by alone, I meant that our dear Baptiste was no longer following us. Finally, it was quiet. Finally, I could just enjoy the surroundings. I felt like I was no longer in danger. Level 3. Our visit was now over. The teachers left us to our free quarter of an hour. However, they forced us to go in groups of 4 and not talk to strangers. You know, the usual stuff. I also received a message from Baptiste at this time, telling me he had been caught by my teachers who had threatened to settle it at the police station. Suddenly, he was waiting at home for me to finish. I decided to switch tactics to the ostrich policy. I didn't answer him at all. With my friends, we decided to revisit certain points that we'd found magnificent without having the impression of dying of fear because of my instinct telling me to steer clear of Baptiste. One of my friends suggested going to a bookshop to look at something, so we all went together. The bookshop formed the corner of 2 streets, and we barely stayed there for 1 minute or so. Then we walked out. I cannot describe to you in words what I felt when I saw Baptiste standing on the corner of the street right across from me. I had this feeling of being paralyzed, having tachycardia, having difficulty breathing, and just not feeling in control. I was officially no longer in control of my body, caught in a state of tetany, of panic. I looked at Baptiste, who was much older than in the photo, since he must have been at least 27. I didn't ask him directly. It wasn't really my priority at this time. My friends, of course, were just as shocked as I was. Baptiste started calling out to me, saying hello, trying to come over to hug me, do the cheek kiss. He then even did it with my girlfriends, and shook the hands of my boyfriends as well. It seemed like in that moment it was just the two of us, me and Baptiste. He approached me and took me under his arm, as if we were a love-love couple, and that we knew each other well. Once again, the physical contact irritated me. He started to take me to I don't know where. And that's when my buddy Jonathan approached me and grabbed me by the waist. Smart move from my friend to make him implicitly understand that I was already in a relationship and that he better not try to get someone else's girl. We're not actually in a relationship, but I'm thankful he tried to help me. I can never thank Jonathan enough, who had the idea of impersonating my boyfriend. He was very aware of my discomfort. As soon as Baptiste saw this, he ceased his physical contact and removed his hand from my waist. Baptiste then suggested that we go to a bar, telling us that he would pay for everything. All we had to do was just enjoy. My friends tried to drill it into him that we were once again only 15 years old, so we would not be touching a single drop of alcohol. Not really knowing how to get out of this situation, we followed him to the bar with the pretext that if the teachers found us there, we were going to get screwed. He therefore suggested going onto the terrace, which we accepted for a lack of an alternative. There begins an extremely embarrassing situation which lasted a long 5 minutes. The four of us, my friends and I, were at one table, with Baptiste sitting at another table with his back to me. We talked like that back to back, him asking me tons of questions, and me answering them in automatic response mode. I also watched my friends a lot as they were giving me clues on what to do. Finally, Jonathan pretended that we had to return to the meeting point given by the teachers. We were getting ready to leave. Baptiste stayed seated and yelled that it was a great time. If he ever came down to my city, we would have to spend time together. I quickly gabbled a response and we got out pretty quickly. Back in my room, I started to cry a lot, shocked at what happened during the day. We went back to our town the next day, then enjoyed 2 weeks' worth of vacation. When the classes resumed, during our English class, the teacher arrived and simply told us this one sentence: "I owe you the truth." At that moment, my friends and I looked at each other in a we know sort of look. The teacher explained that during the entire visit we were followed by a guy, and during the change of the guide, they went a little further to see if Baptiste was going to approach anyone in specific. They wanted to find out who his target was. After a long moment, the teacher told us that they could not find the person in question, and that after, the history teacher had threatened him to leave us alone. After this event, I blocked him everywhere. I don't know really what his intentions were, if it was just some guy who didn't know how to approach girls, or if his intentions were more sinister. I also don't know what would have happened if Jonathan had not grabbed me back from his grip. If I'd been there all alone, I wouldn't have been able to flee. I've suffered heavy after effects from this trauma. The more time passed, the more I became paranoid when I was in the street alone. Would he be waiting for me on the corner? At the corner of every street? This paranoia became more and more omnipresent, to the point that today I've developed an intense sense of anthropophobia. I can no longer leave my house alone without having panic attacks. The presence of unknown people around me causes me respiratory problems, walking trouble, epinephrine shoots in every muscle of my body to escape, dizziness. I think I'm going to a shrink to settle this problem, because I hate having to live as a recluse, barricaded in my room 24 hours a day. This story happened about 2 years ago when I was 19 years old, and my foster sister, Kira, was 16. For the sake of this story, it's important to know that I was female presenting and hadn't come out as trans yet, nor was I presenting myself in an overtly masculine style at the time. It was the summer before I was going to college. I mostly lived with my mom and Kira, except for every other weekend where I'd stay with my dad. Now, summers where I am can get really hot and humid, so we had a habit of waiting to walk the dogs until 6 or 7 p.m., mostly because it'd be cooler but still light enough outside. On this particular evening, Mom wasn't going to be home until very late. I don't remember the exact reason why. She was a woman that liked to stay busy though. often participated in choirs, Bible studies, youth group events, classes, and more. This meant it wasn't uncommon for Kira and I to be left alone until 8 or 9 p.m. It was up to me and Kira to walk the dogs by ourselves, unless we wanted our younger dog Samson to throw tantrums due to pent-up energy. Even though we lived in the countryside and could have walked them down our street, Kira and I decided to drive out 20 minutes to a park instead. Why? I don't really remember. It could have really been anything, from being bored walking our own roads all the time to not wanting to deal with blind curves and hills. Whatever the reason, at around 7:30 p.m., Kira and I harnessed our 2 dogs, packed them up in the car, and drove out to the park. Let me explain the layout of the park so that it's easier to understand while we got nervous halfway through our walk. This park was not particularly big, but it was very popular because of its loop. The entire park was surrounded by a mile-long looping road with attractions like playgrounds, ponds, a small country hall, all spaced about in the inner side of the loop. The outer side was just a bunch of grass, trees, and one shabby playground at its end. Thus, it was common and expected to pass people walking the loop at least 2 times if you were walking in opposite directions, but not if you were walking in the same direction, obviously. Any cars on this road could only drive in one direction because it was a one-way road. At first, everything about the walk was normal. I parked the car safely, we clipped our dogs to leashes, and started on the loop. Every so often, we'd stop so I could take pictures with our good boys, particularly of Kira trying to wrangle Samson. He was always pulling like his life depended on it, and weaving around because he wanted to smell everything. It was while I was taking one of these pictures that our first encounter happened. A man who looked to be in his 40s or so walked past us, walking the same direction we were, up towards the playground on the outer side of the loop. He passed a friendly smile at Kira, nodded, and said, "Hello, cute dogs," or something like that, and kept right on walking. I honestly didn't think anything of it. We were at a park at a time of day where it was common to walk around due to the cooler temperature, and people where I am are generally friendly anyway. Smiling and saying hi is fairly normal no matter who says it. We smiled back, said our own hi's or thanks, depending on what he said, and that would be it. Or so we thought. The man passed us by again only a short 10 minutes later, directly across from where we'd seen him previously. Just like he did before, he smiled and waved and said hi. This time, Kira and I looked at each other once as he was ahead of us, and shared a, "Well, that was weird," expression. Just another 10 minutes later on the dot, he walked past us walking towards the playground and subsequently broke off from the loop. He'd been walking in the same direction as us as well. This time, though, he cut in front of us. He did it in a way where we had to stop to avoid running into him. Hell, he nearly touched Kira with how close he was walking. It was already so weird in and of itself. The other weird part was him cutting past us in the opposite direction. The only way he could have done that was if he'd cut across the inside of the loop, since it would have been close to impossible to pass us at our current point from the other direction if he'd decided to walk the opposite way of the loop than us. It started coming off almost like he was intentionally walking by us over and over again. But just like before, Kira and I brushed this weirdness off. Maybe this guy was just enjoying a random stroll and doing his own weird thing for all we knew. Besides, we had 2 reasonably sized dogs with us. Who'd mess with people like that? Not even 5 minutes later, though, the same man passed us by again, once again cutting so close past us that he nearly brushed shoulders. Again he smiled, and waved before walking off. This was officially the moment I decided we needed to leave. Sure, it was normal to pass a person at least 2 times if you're going in opposite directions, but doing so takes a while. You have to at least get to the parallel spot on the loop from where your paths first intersected to see each other again. I wasn't really a fan of how he was cutting across us. The first time, he passed us like a normal person. Every time after, he'd just been walking up around us, behind us, weird directional paths. So yeah, I told Kira to hustle so we could get to our car and get out instead of doing a second loop around. That's exactly what we did. When we were almost to our car, we noticed a car creeping along behind us. We pulled to the side and stopped to let it pass, but for a second it stopped too. We figured this person must be getting ready to park, so we started walking again. The car started creeping along slowly behind us just as soon as we did. We stopped once more, and the car stopped with us. We hadn't seen that middle-aged guy for a while since the third cutoff, so we figured we might have overthought the whole thing. Here we were, though, with this tinted windowed car acting extremely suspicious. Was it the same guy returned with his car? A different creep? We couldn't tell. Before anything could happen, though, another car idled up to the one next to us. Whoever it was sped up to the expected 5 miles per hour. We got to our car pretty fast after that and practically picked up the dogs to get them inside of it. We got in and got out of there. My mistake, however, was neglecting my rear-view mirror and the well-advised rule to not just drive straight home if you're worried a stranger has taken too much interest in you. I was anxious, dumb, and primarily concerned with getting home where we could be safe. Because home is always safe, right? Nothing bad is supposed to happen to you there. My naive sense of false security. I think we got home around 8-something. The sun had finally disappeared behind the horizon, but it wasn't fully dark yet, just that dusty purple color the sky gets before it finally accepts its nighttime. My mom wasn't quite home yet, so we got the dogs some water, locked the doors, ate a late dinner, and chilled in the living room, talking about a bunch of stuff that really didn't matter. It was almost 9:30 when the scariest part of this whole ordeal occurred. There Kira and I were sitting on different couches, talking about one thing or the other, when we noticed the ceiling briefly light up over where Kira was sitting. An important note here is that Kira was sitting on a small couch with her back to a window that faces the front of the house, while I was on the couch on the opposite wall where I could see a sliver of the front porch. Due to our long, slightly curvy driveway, it was very common to see headlights stream in through the window, light up the ceiling, fade, intensify. It just meant that someone was coming home. So, when that ceiling lit up above Kira, we thought nothing of it, assuming our mom was finally coming back from wherever she'd gone that night. We didn't take any notice of the light skipping the final arc of someone pulling all the way up into the driveway either. We also didn't pay any mind at first to how long it was taking Mom to come inside. After all, she had a habit of pulling in and then checking her phone for God knows how long before coming in. After a couple of minutes, though, I noticed the small motion sensor light Mom had set up on the porch light up. Again, I could only see a very sliver of space based on my position and the curtains. Basically, I could see a smidge of the table and the rails bordering our porch, but not its stairs or anything approaching the door depending on how they moved. I wasn't paying particular attention either, because I assumed it was my mom. Right after the light went off, we both heard the storm door open, but we didn't hear anyone pressing in the code keys of our lock or jiggling the door handle like Mom usually did right away. The moment our storm door creaked open, our 2 dogs jumped up and ran to that door barking like mad. Samson, our dumb goofball son who was incapable of hurting a fly, jumped up on his hind legs and scrabbled to find purchase on one of the small windows in a desperate attempt to see who was outside. Immediately, the storm door slammed shut, and we heard heavy footsteps on the cement of our porch. Calvin started going nuts and jumped up on Kira's couch, standing on its back to look out the window. Samson ran out of the room then and went out the doggy door that led to the back porch, which had a ramp going down to a fenced-off portion of our yard. Suddenly, I felt like I couldn't move. I'd never understood, really, what people meant when they described their limbs turning to lead, until that moment. I felt like I didn't have limbs, really. Like moving just wasn't an option. If I moved, I might glimpse something, or someone through those windows. That person could see me running around the house, freaking out, and decide to come after us after all. So I sat there, my mind steadily going blank as my heart sped up and my limbs refused to move. In the game of fight, flight, or freeze, I found out I'm the freezer. Kira, on the other hand, is a fighter. She spun around and looked out the window. Unfortunately, we couldn't see anything because it was too dark. Naturally, she got up, grabbed a stray dog toy which just so happened to be a tug-of-war rope with a ball on one end, and opened the door. I told her very calmly to shut it and stay inside, but she ignored me and stepped out onto the porch. She came back inside after a moment of not seeing anything, but to my utter disbelief, she disappeared into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and went outside again. This time she was gone for a handful of seconds before running back inside and slamming the door shut. Breathless, she tells me she went out a bit into the yard and saw the outline of a man by the rundown dog kennel we don't use anymore. She saw him and froze when he moved. This time she listened to me when I told her to lock the door. I managed to call my mom despite my head being empty and my limbs being lead. She managed to convince me to get up and make sure all the doors were locked, including the basement, and make sure the dogs were inside. After Mom got home and looked around, finding nothing, we called the non-emergency number for the police, not wanting to bother them in case we were overreacting. They sent 2 officers out who walked around our yard and found nothing. We got the sense they didn't quite believe us, but instead saw us as 2 overexcited girls with exaggerated imaginations. Still, they humored us and told us that after we told them about the park, that if we thought anyone might be following us or if someone was acting a little too creepy, to not drive straight home next time. Then they just left. To this day, I'm pretty sure the only people who believe someone with malicious intent came into our home in hopes of finding 2 teenage girls are Kira and me, though. Whether or not it was the same guy from the park, we can't be sure. But it's too coincidental, isn't it? That day, we had multiple encounters with this guy, who went out of his way to get close to us. Then a car inched along behind us, and all of a sudden we have an almost home intruder encounter. There were way too many details adding up for us to have overly excited imaginations. We both saw those headlights, the storm door open and staying open until Samson jumped to look out the door's window. We heard those footsteps, and Kira saw someone. I don't know what would have happened if Calvin didn't have a scary manic bark or if Samson wasn't tall enough to look out the high windows on the door. I don't know much of anything. What I do know is this, though. If you're out and about minding your own business, and a stranger is taking too much notice of you, following you, and frequently running into you, just trust your gut. Don't drive or walk straight home. Meander, get to a public place, and take your time. Pay attention to your surroundings, because you never know who could be watching you. Before I start, I have to explain something. I lived 2 years ago in a house that had a terrace and a small parking lot right below this terrace. My room was upstairs, and there was a door to the stairs that could be locked. I lived in the south of France in the Pont Royal area. Everything was going pretty well. I lived with my former father-in-law and my mother. This particular day, I was playing Minecraft in my room. For no reason, I decided to look to the left towards my window, only to see a man standing there with a balaclava, staring at my window. I see an object in his hand, but I couldn't quite see what it was. Obviously, I got stressed. I went to go warn my mother and my stepfather, totally panicked. They locked all the doors, and it took me a while after to fall asleep and forget about it. Weeks go by after this with no incidents, but about 2 months after the initial stressful moment, I encountered the same situation. This time, I was playing Among Us with some friends. I had changed my habits since, though. I had been always looking at the window to see if the guy would be there, and I was always making sure all the doors were locked and closed, too. I see this guy again. Although I'm stressed, this time I was really scared, because this time I was home alone. I left the room for 10 seconds to check something, and suddenly, I couldn't see him anywhere anymore. I told myself maybe he'd finally gone away, but no. I heard a big noise at the front door. I deduced quickly that he was trying to force it open. I was totally stressed out. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and my laptop in a bag. I thought about how to best escape the situation. I opened the window and went down on my terrace. I dropped down to the parking lot. I heard at this moment another noise coming from my house, then a third one. I saw the same guy come out, and I saw the object he was holding was a knife. I started to run until I reached the house of a friend, totally exhausted by my sprint. Fortunately, he opened up to me immediately. I told him with some difficulty what happened to me. In the meantime, I called my mother and the security of the domain. Shortly after, I saw the same car make several turns and pass by 4 times in front of my friend's house. By the second passage of the car, I recognized the man who was there a few moments earlier. in the passenger seat, and I saw not only one person, but 4. 2 years after having lived through this experience, I obviously moved to a bigger city, but moreover to an apartment in a quiet district, and I often have my boyfriend come to see me.
I grew up in an extremely small Texas town until the age of 13, where all the childhood memories I have are from. My dad lived in Austin and picked me up every other weekend, holidays and during the summer, so I knew there was another world out there, but this was my home, and this was what I was familiar with. As you can imagine, in a small town, we're talking 393 people worth of population. Everyone knew everything about everyone. There was petty crime like drug use and the occasional peeping Tom, but that person was well known to the public by everyone in the town soon after the event. You got away with nothing if someone else knew about it. Let me mention, because this is a small town, because this small town was surrounded by larger small towns, we were hardly even considered a school district. K through 12th grade in one school. Barely 1A, and if you're from Texas, you know what I mean. We didn't even have a real stoplight, and to this day I still don't even know if they do. Only one gas station that was closed about half of the time, and even no grocery store. So, this town had a voluntary fire department, but no actual police. That's right, none. You'd call and get the next town over's police, which were in the same county, so they considered themselves to be our police, but they were located about 20 miles away. 20 miles to drive to an emergency call. So in my late childhood, at around 10, we heard about this handyman named Kyle. A middle-aged big guy who everyone worked with, who had inappropriately touched a couple of kids in the town. One of them being my next-door neighbor, a teenage girl whose dad considered Kyle his brother. We all knew what he looked like, and felt some type of shame for being so naive and nice, because everyone had met or knew him thought nothing negative. I even felt safety around him at one point. Those 2 occasions happened over a year's worth of time, and we hadn't seen him around since the news came out and the kids came forward. He creeped us out, and every adult in the community shunned him. Adios, Kyle. Flash forward 3 years. I'm in the 6th grade now, and one of my schoolmates' parents have asked my mom if their 2 daughters can stay on a school night, because they had to go to a court date very early in the morning and needed to prepare. It was no problem, as my mom was a single parent and very understanding. My mom is a very sweet person, with hardly any boundaries because she's so understanding, which gets her in trouble, but it's also nice to have in a parent. We played outside in the neighborhood most of the day, and came back to set up my room for 3 beds, where my mom would be getting dinner ready. When we got back, we noticed my mom seemed like she was going somewhere, or had left and come back, which was unusual. There wasn't really anywhere to go, but then I noticed she was drunk. Heavily drunk. How long had we been gone? The sun had just gone down, so maybe 2 hours at most. A little backstory. My mom is tiny. 5'1" and 120 pounds. She never drank in my childhood, and when she did, it was extremely noticeable. Glassy eyes, slurring, wandering eyes, anger, lying, and making no sense. But I could only name a handful of times that it happened, and when it did, she had had 1 beer. Anytime I saw her with this beer, I would get mad, because I knew she wouldn't be normal. She rarely did this, so I remember almost every tantrum I threw. That's why this wasted behavior made no sense, but I knew it was alcohol. I was immediately embarrassed. My poor friends had to see this mess. I herded them straight into my room, where we got ready for our school day the next morning and tucked ourselves in without any dinner. I knew they must be hungry, so I sat there wide awake, thinking about what we could make the next morning to make up for it. The only light in the room was glowing from the doorframe that faced the kitchen. I guess my mom must be in there, but all we heard was shuffling around. Then my friend shook my leg from her pallet and said, "Zoe, did you hear that man?" I laid there frozen. Worry hit the pit of my stomach, and I quickly remembered that I hadn't heard my mom in over an hour. Had she left after we arrived? Did she drive her car that drunk? Is she back? I listened closely, my ears ringing from being so alert. I heard a woman's laugh trying to be quiet, but obviously failing, like a teenage girl sneaking around the house from her parents. I could tell that it was my mom, but the male's voice who came after is what threw a lump in my throat. It was so familiar, and I listened even closer. The next sentence I heard sent me into a full-body tingle. My head went hot, and I could hear my heartbeat, even feel it in my ears. The man said, "So there's 3 of them in there. She's having a sleepover?" I jumped out of the bed and leaped to my bedroom door, telling my friends to stay put. I crept out to the hallway and grabbed the house phone from its stand. I turned to the kitchen and took a deep breath before I ran full force into the middle of them in the kitchen, physically pushing my mom behind me and me in between the two. It was Kyle. I stared him in the face and screamed in the only voice my 13-year-old body could muster, "Get the fuck out of my house!" He stumbled back, surprised and obviously very drunk himself. My mom came full force behind me, pulling me back, but luckily at this age I was 5'5" already, and easily her weight. I had her taken. Other than the stumble, he hadn't moved at all. I stared right at his face and dialed 911. Before I hit talk, I screamed again, "Get the fuck out of my house now, or I'll call the cops. My friend's parents are already on the way." They weren't, but that's all I could think of at the time. All I could think about was the fact that my mom was on the edge of blackout or passing out. The way she could hardly keep her eyes open and couldn't stand upright. And now there's this town-known child molester in my kitchen who knows there are 3 early teen girls in the next room sleeping. I wasn't about to let this guy be here if my mom passed out and were left alone. He stared at me for a moment, and I instinctively hit talk. We all heard the phone ring once, and he took me seriously and ran off. I knew my mom was about to rage, so I ran after him, but toward the bathroom and locked myself in. The house was less than 800 square feet, so I saw him run out the front door as I made it into the bathroom in under 5 seconds. I told the operator the situation while shaking and crying, pleading with her to send help. I wasn't thinking of the trouble my mom would get in, just wanting to help and keep my friends safe. I had no idea if he would return. The operator said help was on the way, but they disconnected. They took 3 hours to arrive, and my friend's parents were already there trying to talk my mom down. The rest of the evening was horrendous while we waited for their parents. I think they eventually caught him for a crime in another town, but I have no idea where he came from that night or why my mom picked him up. My mother could not retell you the night to this day because she was so intoxicated at the time. This night, unfortunately, was the kickoff of a 3-year blackout my mom had from alcoholism. It wasn't there. Then one day it was, and it tore my family apart. My mom lost 3 years of her life, and those are 3 years I wish I never had to live through. But it made us who we are today, and I guess I wouldn't change that for the world. This was one of many scary situations my mom put me through, but I think bucking up to a pedophile at 12 was probably the one I'll always remember. One time, I went to the bar with one of my friends. I had just turned 21, so I hadn't been to many bars at that point. My friend was drinking on the way to the bar, so he was already pretty drunk when we got there. When I sat at the bar, a cute girl came and talked to me and my friend. She said her name was Candace, and I noticed she had really bright red hair. I assumed she dyed it. It was pretty, but a bit unnatural. Anyways, this girl was flirting a lot with me and my friend. She could tell my friend was already pretty drunk. To be honest, I played along like I was drunk already too, since it seemed to be working for my friend. I didn't know if she was just trying to get free drinks, so I told her we didn't have much money. She offered to buy us drinks. She kept buying us drinks, and I started to get confused as to who she liked between me and my friend. My friend went to the bathroom, but before he came back, he was kicked out by the bouncers for being too drunk. Candace and I went outside with him. She kept telling him to come home with her, but he was so out of it that he could barely answer her. I told her he was a bit too drunk and that I couldn't let him go anywhere. I didn't want him to wake up hungover in some random house with no car and no idea what happened. Candace kept pushing it, saying that she would take care of him, but I told her no because I had to stay with him. I was more sober than him, so he was my responsibility. I told her the only way he was going anywhere was if I tagged along. I assumed she thought that I was jealous or cock-blocking, but my friend could barely stand on his own and had lost interest in Candace already at that point. She immediately started flirting with me and offered to get my friend a taxi to drive him home. She said we could go to her place alone. At this point I had had a few drinks and I was pretty buzzed, so I agreed readily. We took my friend to the taxi and walked to her car. I stumbled slightly while on the way to her car. "Wow, you're pretty drunk, huh?" she said, smiling as she held onto my arm. I couldn't do anything but just say yeah. I don't know why, but I just felt slightly shy and anxious. Everything was happening a bit too easily for me, so I felt really uneasy. We got in our car and we drove down the street. "You want to stop at the liquor store and get some more to drink? I'll buy it, so don't worry about paying," she offered. I didn't want to drink any more than I already did. I was pretty buzzed and wanted to be able to carry myself throughout the rest of the night. Sometimes I made myself look stupid when I'm drunk, so I didn't want to ruin anything with Candace more than I already did earlier, with telling her my friend was too drunk. I told her I was already drunk enough, but she insisted. I didn't want to seem lame, so I told her to get me a pint of liquor with some apple juice to chase it. She went into the store and came out with a lot more than just a pint. I assumed she wanted to drink more also, and that's why she got a fifth instead of a pint. On the car ride, we passed the bottle back and forth, but she just took tiny sips. I tried to take tiny sips as well, but she kept passing the bottle to me and telling me to drink a lot. I somehow managed to drink all of my apple juice and pretend to drink the bottle by spitting the liquor back into the apple juice bottle. I tossed the apple juice bottle full of liquor out the window before she could see it. I didn't want her to know I was acting drunker than I was. She actually believed I was a sloppy drunk when I was actually just a little buzzed. I took a couple more sips of liquor and finished off the bottle. Throughout the car ride, I called her the wrong name a couple of times, just to try and get a reaction out of her. She didn't react to it, though. She just kept letting me call her Carla without correcting me. For some reason, I thought she lied to me about her name initially. We drove up to her house, and I pretended to trip and stumble into her front door. She helped me walk inside by holding me up. She opened her front door, which was unlocked, and we walked into her house. She closed her front door immediately and then locked it. I thought it was a bit strange, but assumed she didn't want anyone walking in on us. I told her immediately that I had to use the bathroom. I walked into her bathroom, locked the door, and looked into the mirror. I don't know, I just felt strange. It felt like something was off. I felt myself becoming more drunk from finishing the bottle earlier. I turned on the sink to make some noise and make myself puke up the liquor I had drunk. I flushed and went to the sink, and started drinking the tap water out of my hands to sober up. I just didn't want to be drunk, but I still wanted to hook up with Candace, so I wanted to pretend to be. I turned the sink off, and I could hear her talking to someone in the background. He's drunk as hell. He can barely stand up. You do it. Who was she talking to? And do what? I walked out of the bathroom and into the living room. The moment I stepped into the living room, I saw her walking into another room. All I could see was the back of her head, that very strange bright red hair going into another room. I didn't see her face or anything. I just saw her kind of weirdly walk fast into the room. The living room itself was pretty dark. "Hey, where are you going?" I slurred like I was drunk. She walked back into the dark living room and up to me. "Let's go into my room," she said. I looked at her bright red hair and then into her eyes. They were different. Her face was different. It was another girl with the same hair. That's when I realized it was another girl with the same wig on. It had been a wig the whole time. She had changed it with the girl from earlier for whatever reason. My heart felt like it stopped, but I tried to look like I had no idea it was a different girl. I kind of smiled at her and told her I just needed to use the bathroom one more time and told her sorry that I was so drunk. She said, "It's fine, just hurry it up in there." I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I could hear her whispering something to someone again this time, and I think I heard a male voice whisper back. I honestly didn't concentrate on listening to exactly what she said. Something sketchy was going on, and I knew I had to get out of that house. I opened the bathroom window up all the way and jumped straight out of it. I ran faster than I've ever ran in my life. I didn't look behind myself or anything. I just ran through the backyard, jumped the fence and ran through someone else's backyard, hit the road and ran toward the main road. I kept running down the main road until I saw a Star CVS, and I ran into it. I stood straight at the front of the store in front of the camera. I called a taxi and they drove me home. I tried to think about what happened that night. What was she, or they, planning? Why did she tell me a fake name? And why was she trying to get my friend and I so drunk? I thought maybe robbery, but she kept spending money on us. She kept buying us drinks and even paid for my friend's taxi cab. And mostly, why did she wear that wig that she gave to another girl to wear? Who was she talking to? What did it mean? And what was in that room they tried to lure me into? This happened almost a year ago, and it's all thanks to my little shit of a husky. She was a super cute 10-pound fluff ball at the time this happened. I was living in a pet-friendly apartment complex, and I had just bought her. I'd picked her up at around 10 a.m. that morning, and went to visit my parents' house so they could meet her. I stayed all day and didn't arrive home until 8 or 8:30 p.m. We walked in and I introduced her to the apartment, played with her a bit, took her to the bathroom, and went to bed. During the night, she woke me up twice to pee, and whined a bit since she was in a brand new environment. She wasn't too loud, though, and I quickly calmed her down by putting her on my bed. She crawled on my head and fell asleep. Since I read that huskies are very active dogs, I decided to take her on her first walk on the sidewalk beside the building. As we started our walk, we passed the side of the building that shows the balconies. I lived on the 3rd floor, and the guy who lives directly below me was standing on his balcony, filming me on his phone. I felt a bit weird about it, but I didn't think too much about it, since the landlord has actually told me before he mentioned to her that he enjoyed me living above because I was quiet. Also, a lot of the tenants in the complex were having a fit over my husky, and would hold her and pet her whenever they saw her. So I thought he was just filming her to show to his friends, or maybe talk about her later with me. I spent the whole day with her, and getting her familiar with me in her new home. Night rolls around and I took her out before I went to bed at around 11:30. I walked past a red car that was running, but didn't have its lights on, so I couldn't see who was in the car. I didn't think much about it because it wasn't unusual for people to sit in their cars waiting for someone. I lived right beside a college and had many college students living in the building, so I thought maybe they were waiting for someone so they could head off to a party or something. Well, I didn't think too much of it. I was still aware of my surroundings since I'm a young woman alone at night. My puppy finally used the bathroom after around 20 minutes of sniffing around, and I picked her up and walked past the car to go inside. The driver's side suddenly opens, and a tall man steps out and yells, "Are you allowed to have that dog?" almost aggressively. I turned around and noticed it was my neighbor, and replied, "Oh yeah, you're allowed to have dogs here." I was confused as to why he was asking that, since he's lived here longer than me, but I answered him anyways. He points at my dog. "No, you dumb bitch. Did you get permission from the landlord to have that thing?" As soon as he cursed at me, I clenched the dog closer to my chest and nodded, still confused and now a bit frightened. "Seriously? I know you're lying, bitch. You don't have permission. I videotaped you this morning and sent it to the landlord, and she said she had no clue about her." I know he's lying, because I did tell her about my dog. I just hadn't paid the deposit yet since it was the weekend, and she had told me she was fine with that. I explained this to him, but he cursed at me more, calling me a lying bitch, and how we kept him up all day and night with her running around and stomping. I know that was impossible, because a dog of this size can't stomp or make noise to keep him up at night. She hasn't barked or howled once, and just whines a little at times, but that's not loud enough to keep him up all night, especially since I was asleep right next to her, and I slept fine. I finally interrupted and apologized to cut the convo short, because he was getting more angry as time went on. He pauses and says, "Shut the fuck up. You don't mean that. I'm calling the landlord tomorrow to report you and your dog. I swear if she keeps me up again tonight, I'll fuck you and her up, bitch." I freeze at that point because I know he'll mean it. Even though we never had any problems until that day, I've heard him harassing other neighbors and even pulled out a gun on one over their dogs. However, because he's buddy-buddy with the landlord, as in doing drugs and probably sex, he's never gotten in trouble. Despite being scared, my dumbass suddenly gets pissed off for being threatened for no reason, and I stammered out, "I have permission to have this dog, so I'll be there with you tomorrow when you try to report me. You're lying and upset because you hate dogs, even though you live in a pet-friendly apartment. That was a pretty stupid move on your part." Yeah, I know, I was stupid, and the words just came out of my mouth. Suddenly the passenger slings open, and a woman steps out and shouts, "Just go before we beat your ass. I ain't gonna do shit tomorrow but get rid of that damn dog." I didn't know there was someone else in his car, as I was standing closer towards the driver's side. My fear completely took over, and I ran away and into the building. I was on the second floor landing when I hear the lobby doors slam, and footsteps pounding up the stairs. I let out a scream and hurry up to the third floor, down the hallway and into my apartment. I locked all the locks and put my door stopper against the doorknob. From outside my window, closer towards the end of the hall, I heard laughter, and then they walked away. I locked myself in my bedroom and cuddled my puppy as I cried. I stayed up all night, afraid they would try to break in and kill me and my dog. The next day I called my mom to pick me up, and didn't come back until 2 weeks later when I moved out. I brought all of my male cousins for extra protection that day. In the end, I had to move back in with my parents, because I'm afraid to be out on my own now. But I ended up getting my deposit and last month's rent back. I never reported the couple because I didn't know their names, and just didn't want to be involved with them anymore. I also felt discouraged because my landlord practically took his side, and rushed the process for me to leave. She quickly gave me my money back if I didn't involve her boss or the police. After that day, I learned she wasn't the landlord but merely the apartment manager. Looking back, I wonder if I could have sued. I first met her many years ago at a festival. I'm a professional artist, and I sell my work at festivals and conventions. She was being harassed by a creeper near my booth, and my friend who saw the whole thing offered for her to hide behind the booth with us. We were all girls in our early 20s, so I thought nothing of it. We quickly became friends, and she would visit me whenever I was selling art at nearby events. She would also help me out with work as well. I've met many amazing lifelong friends this way, and I thought she would be another good friend. I invited her over to my house for a tea party. I like very tame parties. After knowing her for over a year, all went really well, and she was so fun to be with around everyone. Then one day I got a call from her, crying and being incoherent. I could understand each word and sentence she said, but nothing she said made any sense together. It's hard to explain, but she kept just saying things that were grammatically correct but had no real information that was conveyed. I was immediately worried about her safety, and somehow got it through that she can stay over at my place, so she came over. In person, she explained a bit more, but it was still really hard to understand her. She said something about breaking her teeth and her family being toxic, so I thought she was probably being abused at home. Later, she revealed her teeth had nothing to do with her family, and it was actually because she had fainted from not eating and hit the floor, breaking her teeth. But her family wasn't starving her. They were worried about her not eating as well. She talked about being unhappy with her school life and wanting to find a job so she can move out of her toxic family's home. She never explained exactly why her family is toxic, just that it was, and I didn't want to question her too much. I came from a toxic family myself, so I felt nothing but sympathy for her. I figured her patchy story was simply because she was distressed. I let her stay for as long as she wanted, but she chose to only spend one night. Later she thanked me, and said she was surprised that I helped her when none of her closer friends did. I thought her so-called friends were just assholes, but I would soon find out why the hard way. From that evening on, she would frequently call me to talk about her troubles. All of them were confusing and hard to understand, but not as incomprehensible as the first call. I ended up staying on the phone with her for hours each time, comforting her and giving her advice, though it was a bit hard since she didn't make a lot of sense. All her troubles were vague, like, I saw my brother. Okay, but what did he do? He doesn't feel real. What does that even mean? I was starting to get frustrated because these calls were so long and frequent, and we'd just go in circles. I didn't even know what she was trying to say 90% of the time. Then she started just showing up at my house at random, without telling me. I'm a busy person with a lot of work, so I don't normally just have free time to hang out, but I always tell myself that it's to help a friend in need, whatever her vague issues were. She would bring a lot of gifts each time as thanks, despite me telling her to not waste her money on me, since she had said that she wanted to move out and needed a way to save up. Sometimes I would spend the weekend with my boyfriend at the time, and she would wait outside my apartment, then leave a gift at the door without ever telling me. It was weird, but I just figured that that was her way of showing thanks and that I should appreciate it. This all goes on for about a year. One day I was celebrating another friend's birthday when she texted me sounding suicidal. I called her, but the signal was bad, so only text could go through. She was starting to say crazy shit, like there was no way I could actually be nice to her, and that I must be faking it so that I can laugh at her behind her back. I was really hurt by this, because I spent so much time trying to help her, and out of nowhere she calls me a fake. I ask her why she thinks that, and she explains it's because I'm dating a guy. Apparently, she had got it in her head that I'm a lesbian. I'm not, and she never mentioned herself being one either. So dating a guy makes me a liar, and therefore I'm lying about helping her. At that point, my phone was dying, and I tell her that. I also tell her she needs to see a medical professional, because I can't help her at all anymore. She says it's proof that I'm a fake person, and a bunch of other negative stuff. My phone dies, and I try to enjoy the rest of my friend's birthday, since whatever's wrong with her is beyond what I can handle. About a month later, I haven't heard from her at all, when without warning she's ringing at my doorbell. After that last text conversation, I didn't want to deal with her anymore, so I just pretended that I wasn't home. As expected, she left a gift bag by my door, which I could see through the peephole. I didn't go out to get it, and after about 10 minutes the door rang again. I felt that something was off, so I stayed by the door and looked out. She would move the gift bag and go hide somewhere, then adjust the location of the bag and ring the doorbell, while hiding again. She did this for an hour, all while texting me saying she did see a doctor so she's all better now, and I should just open the door. I kept thinking if I just pretend I'm not home, that she'll really leave this time. But she didn't. Then I suddenly saw her hand come up and cover the peephole so I couldn't see out anymore. That freaked me out so much, I frantically texted my other friends for help, and they told me to call the cops, so I did. The police arrived in 5 minutes and asked her to leave. She lies to their face, saying that there's been a misunderstanding, that I had invited her over to hang out because we're friends. Good thing the police already knew my side of the story, because she's a small and innocent-looking girl, and could have fooled anyone. They tell her to leave again and told her that I specifically did not want her and did not invite her. She lies again, but more crazy this time. She says she's from Nebraska, where friends just visit each other without invitations. The police tell her this is California, so she can't exactly do that. They finally escorted her away before I opened the door and thanked them. After that, I didn't hear from her for a year, until I announced to my online followers and my art that I would be at the same festival that I met her at. She leaves a comment under my post, saying she'll come stalk me again, her exact words. She said it as if it was a funny joke, like haha, she's definitely not a stalker, and how silly it was of me to have thought that. I was really stressed out, because she's clearly unstable, and who knows if she'll get worse. I contacted the cops and had my BF tell her sternly to leave me alone, or we'd call the police. She acted very offended, like she was just a nice girl, and wanted to know why we were being so mean to her. Thankfully, that was the last I heard from her, and it's been 2 years since. Now I know why none of her other friends offered to help her when she first came to me. I wish they had warned me, too. One summer long ago, I worked for a house painting company made of many small franchises, preying on college students for underpaid and overworked employees. Said indentured servants/workforce generally returned to school in late August, and the franchise would close until the next summer. I was a lackey who hired everyone, formed crews, met with customers, transported materials, and the like. AKA my boss's job, but he preferred, not doing it. Late in the summer, my boss decided to continue into the fall months so he could make a bit more money while depriving me even further of the will to live. So I had to hire people who were in the painting business, but for whatever reason couldn't find a job with a reputable company, and had no option but to work with us. Yay. Enter Jim. Jim was a veteran, about 45 years old, which was far above my usual 18 to 22 hiring demographic, but he had impressed me over the phone. As I was essentially painting entire houses myself, or with a skeleton crew until I could scrounge up more workers, I didn't interview him in person. Just told him to show up ready to go and to meet me and the crew at a new job site 9 a.m. on Monday. Life happens, as it does, and I had a family emergency that prohibited me from being there on that Monday. Some of my summer workers who didn't go off to school would be there, so I texted them explaining them to help Jim get used to the way we worked, and to make sure to keep it all basic. If he was having trouble, send him home, and he'd start over with me there the next day. At 9:45 a.m., my phone is blown up with texts and calls. I'm not awake, but I slip outside to hiss into the phone. I'm staring at a dead family member, and you know this. What do you need? Jim isn't okay. What do you mean? He's fucking insane. He's ruining this person's roof, and he won't listen to us. He keeps screaming at us to shut the fuck up. Well, I thought Jim had a point with the last part, since my crew spent more time talking than painting. But I digress. In their infinite wisdom, my crew stuck this new dude up on the roof to paint a teeny space, which would take about 5 minutes with a brush. Homeboy pulls out a 9-inch roller and goes to town, swooping the thing up and down like a skateboarder on a half-pipe, so the entire black roof area below him is covered in beige paint. I tell them to get him down immediately and send him home. I'll deal with it after the wake. I tell my boss what's going on. He brushes it off, saying that Jim called him to apologize, and to tell him he could bring his cousin, Oscar, a guy who's apparently worked as a painter in a union, to the next job. The boss doesn't consult me at all. Says it's fine and I have to deal with it. Oh, great. It's a new job site and a new day. I still hate my life. Oscar isn't in a union, but he did work as a painter for over a decade, until he was put in jail for armed robbery, a jail stint that he was fresh out of as of a week ago. To Oscar's credit, he was very polite, respectful, and deferent. I had asked to speak with him alone before I let him set foot on my job site, and he was completely upfront about his jail time and what led to it, answering any and all questions that I had. I was pretty convinced, and he did do an excellent job. My boss stopped by for the first time in forever, and was also impressed by Oscar. So impressed that he decided Oscar and Jim would take on a job by themselves, a job that was mostly trim work for a family of mom, pop, and 3 daughters, 15, 11, and 7. He also decided that he would take care of all the customer interaction, with the exception of me dropping off the extra tall ladder halfway through, to reach one ridiculously small but very high place. Halfway through the job, about 2 days in, I show up like a good peon, massive ladder in tow. Jim is listening to music, and I see Oscar furtively look at him, then wave to me to keep driving and park around the corner. I love me some drama. I don't care about anything anymore, so I do. Oscar sprints directly to my car, and tells me that Jim has been making the owners and their daughters very uncomfortable, and my boss has been ignoring their calls. Oscar had told them to privately wait until the day I came, and he would make sure that I talked to them to help. I thanked Oscar and told him I would deal with it right then, and requested he hang around and proceed as if everything is fine, just in case I needed his assistance in any capacity. I pulled into the driveway, nodded at Jim, and knocked on the door. I was pulled in almost immediately by a frantic and hot mother. The family was Russian, so I was treated to a deluge of information that I could mostly understand, but the rest made me think Red from OINTB found out that I didn't like her food. Apparently Jim had been very opportunistic about his ladder positions as he worked on the second floor of the house, and they were conveniently always able to see directly into the girls' bedrooms, which he took pictures of on his phone. He also made multiple comments to the girls as they came home from school that were a sizable step over the line of pedophilia. A freaking football field past the line of how you speak to a customer or their kids, period. Massively inappropriate, sexual innuendos, the whole creeper works. I managed to keep myself from melting into the floor and promised them that this would be dealt with immediately. With that, I walk out to confront Jim. I ask if I can use his phone because mine was dead, and after he hands it over, I find almost 100 pictures of the various bedrooms from every angle possible, even zoomed in. He sees me open the pictures from his position on the ladder and starts flying down, screaming at me. He launches at me, and Oscar puts himself in between us, yelling at Jim to calm down. Jim panics and flees for his car, leaving his phone with me. The police were called and I handed the phone over. I was interviewed, and poor Oscar almost had a panic attack, but they said they would work with the family and take it from there. Great. I finished the job with Oscar, we get tipped, and the family thanked us for our role in helping them, as they didn't really know how to handle what Jim was doing. Time passes, and I'm home binge-watching TV in the living room. It's about 9 p.m. Light floods the room suddenly, as a car pulls up my neighbor's driveway with its brights on. I don't particularly care, so I continue watching TV. After a few minutes pass, I hear yelling from my neighbor's house. I look out the window, and it's Jim's car in their driveway, because my boss had given him my home address as to where to pick up the checks at the end of each week. He got confrontational, yelling at the neighbors about where I was at, when really all he had to do was turn around to see my idiot slack-jawed face staring out the window about 6 feet away. He then pulled out a handgun and started motioning at the wife. Before I can even register this actually happening, or go grab my own gun, which I would have heroically used to shoot myself in the foot or something, my living room is filled with red and blue lights, as multiple police cars pull up and consequently arrest Jim. Jim had 4 guns in the passenger seat of his car, one of which was an AR-15, and another a shotgun. Apparently, he had only taken out one to wave over his head, leaving the other 3 in the car because he wasn't 100% sure which house was mine. My neighbors are elderly, nosy, and snarky, and call the cops on anything of little to no consequence. They called as soon as his beater car pulled up in their driveway, and their knee-jerk 911 reaction likely saved my life. Let's not meet again, Jim. Also, you suck at painting. I've posted in this forum before, but I wanted to share this stalking situation I've dealt with for years. First, a little background. This began when I was 19, and continued for several years after that. I'm a male, which I suppose matters in this story. When I was in high school in my first year of college, I worked at a local grocery store part-time. I did everything: bagging groceries, stocking shelves, cashiering, working at the service desk. Toward the end of my time there, I was doing more stuff in the front of the store, mainly the service desk since I'd been there forever, or sometimes cashiering. Anyway, it was just a small little grocery store, so we'd always have regulars. Many of the same customers would come in a lot, and we'd talk with them and get to know them. I was also very young and naive at the time, and thus pretty overly trusting. This would prove to be to my detriment. There was this one guy who would come in about once a week, sometimes maybe twice, and I'd been his cashier quite a few times. Eventually, he started standing in my line even if the other lines were shorter. It wasn't so unusual. I hated working in retail, but I was damn good with the customers, and I was very well liked. The only odd thing was that generally the people who would do this were older, 60s or 70s at least, and were usually ladies. This was a guy who had to be, at most, in his mid-40s. But whatever. I didn't think much of it. His name was Jeff. I didn't know his name for a long time because he always paid with cash. But when I finally learned what it was in one of the worst ways you can think of. We'll get to that. At first, though, Jeff was pretty harmless. He would chat me up, and if we didn't have a line, we'd usually talk for a bit. He seemed pretty interested in me and my life, But again, this wasn't so unusual, apart from his age mostly, but I just went with it. Jeff would ask me things about myself. Innocent questions, or so I thought at the time. He'd ask me stuff like what college I went to, and I'd tell him because I had no reason not to. At one point, he brought up cars, and he asked which one was mine. The parking lot was clearly visible through the large windows at the front of the store, and I stupidly pointed up at my car and said, "It's that one." We all lived in a small area, and a lot of times by talking with customers, we'd realize we lived near each other or something, so I didn't think much of it when he asked me where I lived. I told him the name of the town, which was adjacent to the city the store was in, and then when he asked where in that town I lived, I told him my street, and then described my house like a total idiot. I like to think I'm a smart guy in most situations, but that was just not the case in this one. I didn't realize it at the time, but Jeff was systematically gathering information about me. By the time I realized what was happening, it was far too late. I had told him everything short of giving him my cell phone number or my actual address. One day I was working the service desk when Jeff came in, and he wanted me to ring his groceries up. I was busy selling lottery or a money order to a customer or something. I can't really remember specifically, so I told him that I couldn't. He got this look on his face, like he hated the fact that I had told him no, but it was just for a second, and then he was smiley again. I didn't really talk to him much because, I was with a customer, and Jeff just stood there staring at me. I didn't really notice at first because whatever machine I was using, lottery or money order, again I can't remember, was giving me a hell of a time. Eventually the customer pointed it out. "That guy keeps staring at you." And that's when I looked over at him. He wasn't smiling but looked angry instead. But the moment I looked at him, the smile was immediately back on his face. Then Jeff said something about me wearing a skirt. Now this wasn't the kind of humor he had exhibited before, and was totally out of nowhere, so it gave me pause. I just kind of looked back at him as he went on about how I'd look in a skirt or a dress, just staring at him with a total what the fuck expression on my face. The more he talked about it, the more unnerved I became. Another coworker, Miranda, was in the service center with me, and she and the customer, as well as another nearby cashier, were all giving him what I presume were the same identical expressions. He wasn't stopping, so I realized I had to say something to make him stop, and I couldn't even pretend to be humored by it when I told him. "I don't know what you're talking about. You'll never see me in anything but this uniform." My tone was dead serious, and he knew I wasn't amused. The smile was gone, and I saw something on his face that I had never seen before. It was anger, yes, but it was also humiliation, and he did not like it one bit. He glared at me with a look that I felt in my bones, that rushed through me like a cold chill. My breath caught in my throat as we just stared at each other. I don't even know how to explain it, other than to say this was the most menacing way anyone has ever looked at me. With that look, he was saying, "You'll be sorry. I'm sure of it." Maybe I wasn't at the time, but in hindsight. Without another word, he turned and walked away. After that, whenever Jeff would come into the store, he never stood in my line, which was fine with me. However, he would always loudly talk about me from other registers and glare at me. He would badmouth me, but not in such an overt way where we could really do much about it. Sometimes he wouldn't even refer to me by my name, but we all knew he was talking about me. Sometimes at night I would be the only cashier at the front as we approached closing time. Another would be in the office counting the drawers for the day, while the manager and other workers were usually in the back or throughout the store stocking shelves or cleaning. In the evenings, when I was more or less alone, I would notice the same car pull into the parking lot, but the driver never came in. The main defining feature of this car was the fact that one of the headlights was burnt out. Because of the previously mentioned large windows, everyone in the parking lot could look into the store right at me. It took me longer than I'm proud of to realize what was happening here, and the only way I realized who was in the car was by chance. My car was in the shop, so my mom picked me up from work when I was done, and as I was waiting for her to get there outside in front of the building, I was able to see into the car away from the bright lights of the store. Sure enough, it was Jeff. My shock was palpable, and that was when I truly realized that something was very, very not right about all this. I actually backed away in fear and kept imagining what I would do if he got out of the car. The door inside had locked behind me, and while there were people in the store still, they weren't in the front. But luckily, that was when my mom got there. I didn't tell her because I knew my story would only worry her. Everyone at the store knew about Jeff before long, and it got so bad that when he would come inside, everyone would instantly tell me to go into the back, and they would page me overhead when he left. Everyone, even the managers. We all knew, and we were all creeped out. A lot of times when he would come in, and when he didn't see me, he would leave immediately. I remember once we didn't notice him walking in, and by the time we realized he was almost at the doors. Another cashier, Laura, saw him and looked scared. Now Laura wasn't easily rattled, but this guy had us all on edge, mostly because we were afraid of his weird fascination with me. She urged me frantically to hurry and run to the back. I hadn't noticed him just yet and was confused. I started to ask her why, but before I could finish, she said, "Just go." I clearly remember this moment. These few seconds between the time she said that and the time I saw him walking through the door, where I realized what was happening. Jeff saw me before I rushed into the back, and I was so unnerved that I locked the back door of the loading dock, worried he'd come looking for me back there. When she was gone, Laura had called me back up, and she just couldn't even say anything. She told me that he gave her a furious look and then stormed out of the store, and I remember being worried he would retaliate against her. Luckily, he never did. Things got worse. I began seeing Jeff around the town, like when I would go to movies, to various stores, gas stations, the mall, and even the bank once. Just a couple of these times might be a coincidence, but this was happening a lot. Plus it was Jeff, so I knew it was much more than that. I had no proof that he was stalking me at this point, and still didn't tell my parents. At the time, while I was still in college, I lived at home and commuted to school, and I would often be there until after dark. There were times when I would pull out of the school parking lot, and very shortly after that, I'd see a car behind me with just one headlight. Once or twice, again, could be a weird coincidence, but this was happening at least once a week. I still didn't tell my parents, even though I was pretty sure it was him. Then one night, when I was walking out of the school into the naturally dark and deserted parking lot, I saw a car parked in an empty part of it with the lights off. I didn't think anything of it, until the lights came on, and there was only one headlight. I knew it was him, and I sprinted to my car, threw my shit into it, and got the hell out of there. After that, I started walking out with either security guards or friends when I could, and a couple of times I thought I saw his car, but he never put his lights on unless I was alone. He would never approach me or drive toward me during those times. It was like he was taunting me. It was like he just wanted me to know that he was there, and that he knew how to find me. This continued even after I quit working at the store. I became a tutor at school instead, but his stalking, because that's what it was, I knew for sure now, didn't cease. Once I was at a friend's house after dark, and then I drove home. I was almost there when I realized I had forgotten something. Instead of pulling around in the driveway, I was just going to loop around the street because it was easier, so I drove past my house. This particular night I was home alone. Both my siblings lived elsewhere and my parents were out, so the house was dark. There shouldn't have been anyone in the driveway, because I had just spoken to my parents, and they were nowhere near home. But when I drove by, I saw the dark shape of a car and taillights. Sometimes people turned around in our driveway because it was big. I thought maybe that's what it was, or maybe someone had had some car trouble. But then the car pulled out of the driveway after me, and I looked in my rearview mirror and saw it. The car only had one headlight. This fucker was at my house, and he had been waiting for me. He followed me for a while, and I couldn't go home, and I also didn't want to lead him to any of my friends, so I drove back to the store I used to work at, rushed inside, and looked out the windows to see if he followed me. Miranda was working that night, and asked me what was going on. I couldn't even speak. All I could do was look at her, and she knew. Her eyes got wide, and she couldn't speak either. After that, Jeff began following me a lot more. He'd be at my school more often, and it was like he knew my exact schedule. He knew where I'd be and when I'd be there. I saw him so often, I shudder thinking about the times that I didn't see him, but when he had to be there somewhere. It wasn't just my schedule he learned. He knew my parents too, to some extent, at least when I would be home alone. A few times I'd hear a car pull into the driveway at night, and I knew it was him before I even looked. But he never got out of his car, that I could see at least. He would only stay for about 10 minutes or so. Mainly this would be on Wednesday or Saturday nights when my parents would be at church, and I began avoiding the house at these times, either staying at school to study, or hanging out with friends, or going to the movies or something. At the time, I would occasionally babysit for someone at my parents' church, but during this time, I eventually stopped, afraid that he would follow me there. I decided I needed to look into this guy. At the time, I didn't even know this guy's name, but something told me to look at the sex offenders database, so one day, while at my friend Jill's house, I did just that. We looked at various pictures of nearby sex offenders, and discovered the shocking amount of them in the vicinity. Eventually, one small thumbnail of the pictures caught my eye. It was hard to tell if it was him, so I clicked on it to bring up a larger picture and more information about the man. Jill's internet was crap, so the page loaded slowly. His name came up first. It was Jeff. Jill and I waited for the picture to load, and as it slowly came into view, I stopped breathing for a second, because it was him. That's how I learned his name. And that's how I learned that the man who was stalking me was a sexual predator. I didn't know what to do with this information. Thus far, he hadn't done anything illegal per se, but I knew I needed to tell my parents, so I told them everything. They were shocked, to say the least. They had no idea. Jeff was good at hiding his activities, which makes me think he wasn't just not very stealthy with me, that I didn't catch him so often because he sucked at being subtle. No. Jeff wanted me to know that I was being watched, that I was the object of his obsession, so I told him everything. My dad was angry. I swear if he knew where Jeff was, he would have gone to threaten him to leave me alone or something. My mom was just scared. Really scared. She even cried. We briefly discussed calling the police, but again, Jeff hadn't actually broken the law other than maybe trespassing, but I couldn't prove it was him. All I could do was be vigilant. I thought I would feel better when they knew, but I felt worse. However, they needed to know. Everyone in my life needed to know. So they did. We started taking precautions. By this point I was in my 20s, but I still felt like a child. I didn't have a curfew per se, but my parents were hesitant to leave me alone, even during the day. My dad's normally not easily rattled, which is why it was so unnerving to see him shaken up by this. We started keeping the cats inside, and when the dogs were out, we wouldn't let them out of our sight. More than a few times, I remember sitting out on the back steps after letting them out to keep an eye on them, and feeling like I was being watched. By this point, I never felt comfortable, never felt safe, so it might have just been paranoia, but I don't know. My mom also got me some pepper spray, and I would carry it with me at all times when I was out of the house. At night, I would take a knife to bed. Jeff didn't stop. I remember one time I was at a friend's apartment, and while she was in the bathroom, her front door started rattling like someone was trying to open it. Luckily, it was locked, and before she even got out of the bathroom, it had stopped. I didn't tell her at first because she wouldn't be spending the night there, so she wouldn't be alone. After that, I stopped going to friends' houses. I stopped going anywhere if I could help it, especially alone. And this went on for years. I was out of college and it was still happening. For at least 5 years this went on. When I moved into my first place on my own, I was scared, but I'd been seeing him less and less, and I didn't want to live with my parents forever. Things went fine mostly, and there would be weeks and then months in between Jeff sightings. Then one day I saw him at the store, and I left right away not wanting him to see me. I didn't think he did, and made a few more stops before heading home, and that's when I realized I shouldn't let myself get complacent in this situation. I always made sure my doors and windows were locked when I wasn't home. And even then, especially at night, or if I just had a bad feeling. I've been doing this since even before the Jeff situation began, so that was how I knew there was no way I had left my front door not only unlocked, but slightly open. This wasn't right, and I should have called the police, but I was feeling brazen. I think I was so tired of feeling like I wasn't in control, that I was trying to take the situation back into my own hands, so I readied my pepper spray and headed inside. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, and I went around my place and checked every closet, under every bed. I checked everywhere someone could be remotely hiding, but nobody was there. That was a truly terrifying experience. I kept expecting him to pop out of some hiding place or something, but he didn't. Jeff wasn't there. I still couldn't sleep there that night though, and I didn't want anyone to know, so I got a hotel room that night. For a long time I never told anyone about this incident, because this was a clear line that Jeff had crossed. I had no proof that it was him, but I know that it was him. I never called the police though, because nothing was missing, and there were no signs that anyone had broken in. I knew though that he had been there. I just felt him. It scares me to wonder what would have happened if I'd been home when he got there. Unless you've been through something like this, you can't know what it's like to go through this sort of experience. How it wreaks havoc on your psyche. How it shatters your trust and sense of safety. There are things you don't really notice until they're ripped away from you. There's this feeling of security that I've lost, and I don't think I'll ever get it back again. It's been years since I've seen or heard from Jeff, though I still live in the area. I have no idea if he's still watching me. Most of the time I think he's moved on or been jailed for something else, but every once in a while, I'll be in a parking lot or home alone, and I just get that feeling, the one I've come to associate with him. Maybe it's just the paranoia, a gift that Jeff gave me the day he talked about me wearing a dress. I hope that's all it is, but sometimes I wonder. It's all just a part of my life now. I don't talk about it much, but everyone in my life knows about it. It's like the elephant in the room. I've changed a lot since then. I've got anxiety issues and I'm extremely private. I'm not sure it's all because of this, but it's at least a factor. I'm still cautious. I still don't go out alone after dark. I still lock my doors and windows whether or not it's nighttime and whether or not I'm home alone. I lock the bathroom door every time I shower. I check the locks at least 3 times before going to sleep. I feel nervous if anything's out of place at my apartment, or if I can't find something that should be in a particular place but isn't. I still carry that pepper spray with me even during the day, and I still take a knife to bed with me. This happened a couple of years ago, but I feel like I'm ready to talk about it. In 2016, I had just turned 18 and was in the second semester of community college. I was lucky to get to take a few specialized classes that were requirements for my major. These classes required me to drive about 45 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the main campus of my community college system. This is relevant because I was going to a town that I barely knew much about, and I didn't know anybody who lived there. There was a man in my class named Eddie. He was a big guy in his late 40s. I'm 5'0", and at the time was about 130 pounds, which is to say I'm pretty small and defenseless. We spent a lot of time in the lab for these classes, and he was stationed right across from me. I was a bit more naive and unsuspecting at the time, and wanted to be nice, so I talked with him and my other classmates quite a bit, and was a lot friendlier to him than I would be nowadays. He started being overly friendly to me, and would stand too close and ask too many personal questions. He'd flirt with me in class, to the point it seemed to make the other people uncomfortable to watch. He also started staring at me a lot, with an intense look that really scared me. Of course, being young and not wanting to hurt his feelings, I decided to try and ignore it as best I could. I told my boyfriend about it, but again, Eddie hadn't actually done anything to me, so there wasn't a lot I felt I could do. A few weeks after that all started, all of us were hanging out in a break room type area, studying for an exam in our next class, which was about 30 minutes away. I was sitting at one table, chatting with some middle-aged woman in my class, and Eddie was at the next table over messing with his phone. I announced that I was going to get something from the vending machine and stood up. As I did, he tried, and failed, to discreetly turn his phone toward me and snapped pictures of me as I walked to the machine, got my drink, and bent over to pick it up. I realized what was going on as I was walking back to my seat, with him still taking photos, and I shot him a dirty look. He put his phone away and just sat there staring at me. I was trying to look pissed, but honestly, I was just really freaked out. I excused myself from the table and called my boyfriend, near in tears, telling him what had happened. He was angry, and said that I needed to tell someone, but I said no. I didn't want to make a scene. He tried to comfort me as much as he could, but I had to go to class soon afterwards. Our class finished at about 9 p.m., and since it was January, it was completely dark out when we all walked to our cars. I was actually texting one of my guy friends about what had happened when Eddie walked up to my car. He stopped for a second and looked at me through my windshield, then slowly kept walking, watching me through my driver's side window the whole time. He was parked nowhere near me, and the wind chill was below 0, so he had to have made a point to walk by my car like that. I was terrified, and with my hands shaking, I started my car and drove home as fast as I could, calling my boyfriend on the way and crying. After that, I decided I needed to talk to my professor about what was going on. I was so nervous, but I asked her the next week if I could talk to her privately when class was over. We went to her office, and I told her about Eddie, and what he had done, how he had acted so weird towards me. She told me that she had noticed I tensed up and went quiet whenever he got close to me, and had noticed him paying a lot of attention to me. She told me she believed me about the pictures. It was honestly amazing how she handled it. She promised me that she would move things around where I'd be away from him in the lab, and asked if I wanted her to talk to him about it. I said no, that I didn't want to make him angry, and she said she'd respect that, but she was going to have the security guard stand at the door and watch me go to my car every night, and that she'd tell the program director what was going on, but Eddie wouldn't know that I'd talked to her. By the time we got done, it had been about 30 minutes since class had ended, and she offered to walk me outside. I'm glad that she did, because when we came out of the elevator to the first floor, Eddie was sitting in the foyer alone. Everybody else had gone home long ago. My blood ran cold, but I tried to act as normal as I could. He seemed as surprised to see our professor there as she was to see him. She asked why he was still here, and he said he noticed my car was still parked out front and wanted to make sure I didn't have to walk out myself. I'm pretty sure I was as pale as a ghost, but my professor gave him a look that I couldn't read and said not to worry. She was walking me to my car, and from now on the security guard would be there every night. He said that was good and quickly left and said good night. It still chills me to think about what would have happened if my professor didn't walk me down to my car that night. I have no idea what he was capable of doing. After this, she rearranged our seating and made sure we were never grouped together, and I started making sure I walked out to my car at the same time as a few other women in my class. The security guard was usually in the foyer, and we only had a couple months left of class, so there wasn't really any time for other incidents. But I still caught him staring at me sometimes, and he looked like he was full of rage. It's been a few years. I don't go to that school anymore, and I'm moving to a completely different city soon. I was 23 years old, in grad school working towards my MLIS, and working part-time at the West Valley Library. I wasn't paid much at West Valley, so I applied for a position at the larger Stone River Library System, SRLS for short, and was hired there. The new position required me to work hours at the Crestmont and Cherry Lane branches, but I continued working at West Valley as well. My first shift with the SRLS was Monday night, at the Cherry Lane branch. I didn't need much training, because I was already familiar with the software they used, and working with the public. But one of my new co-workers was explaining some of the more unique policies this library had, when a patron came up and asked where he could find books about World War II. My co-worker asked if I could handle the question, and I told them that I could. Before the co-worker walked away, though, he jokingly said to the patron, "Take it easy on her. She's pretty new." This patron was heavy-set and looked to be in his mid to late 40s. I told him he'd want to look at the 940s in the adult nonfiction section, and he wandered away, but several minutes later he came right back. He said that he was having trouble finding the section, and asked if maybe I could help him find the specific book he wanted. I started searching our system for the title he had requested. He then introduced himself to me as Jim, and extended his hand over the desk to shake mine. I awkwardly shook his hand and went back to searching for the book. He was acting a bit overly familiar with me, and he was very talkative, telling me all about himself. Patrons being overly familiar and talkative isn't really unusual in public libraries. Often people come to the library just to have someone to talk to, so we're conditioned to listen to people as we work, as long as it doesn't interfere with providing assistance to other patrons. We didn't own the title he was looking for, but I told him I could place a hold on it and have it sent here from another library. I placed the hold and told him that he would get a phone call when the book arrived here for him. He then told me that the phone number on his account was his home phone, but he would prefer that we call his cell phone. I offered to change the phone number for notifications to call his cell phone number. He said that he didn't want to do that, because his wife wants calls about her books at home. He then suggested that instead, I could take his cell phone number and call him personally when the book arrives. This was a really strange request. I told him that I couldn't do that because I don't handle the items arriving from other libraries, and I'm only here on very part-time hours. He attempted a sad puppy dog face and said, "Come on, please, can't you do it for me?" I told him the best I could do was change the phone number on his account to his cell phone. He declined and didn't press the issue any further. He then asked if I could show him to the 940s in adult nonfiction. I walked across the library to the 940 section with him. I don't remember our conversation amongst the stacks, but he was clearly trying to flirt with me, and at some point he said something along the lines of, "You look so young, but you really seem to know what you're doing. It's hard to believe you're new here." I told him that I was new to this library system, but that I'd worked at another nearby for several months, and that I also work at another branch in this library system. He then dropped all pretense of looking for World War II books and started grilling me with personal questions. I tried to sidestep them as best as I could, and completely made up the few things I did tell him, but I've always had trouble politely disengaging from uncomfortable conversations like this. After 15 minutes, I told him that the library was really busy tonight, and that I needed to get back to the circulation desk. As I turned to walk out of the aisle, he grabbed my wrist to stop me, held it very tightly, and said, "You should give me your number." I was completely shaken that he'd grabbed me, and I wasn't concerned about being polite anymore. I semi-screamed, "No, I'm not interested," and yanked my arm out of his grasp. I power-walked back up to the circulation desk and into the staff room, where I then caught shit from the supervisor on duty for disappearing for almost 20 minutes. By the time my chat with the supervisor was over, Jim had already left the library. I quickly went back to the computer where I placed the hold for him, opened the transaction log, and opened his library account from there. I wrote down his card number, his full name, and his address. The next day was my first day of work at the Crestmont branch. It was pretty uneventful. Thursday I worked at the Crestmont branch again. When I arrived, the supervisor told me that someone called looking for me on Wednesday, but didn't want to leave a message. I had no idea who it could have been, so I just shrugged it off. Later that day, a coworker told me there was someone on the phone for me. I picked up the call, and it was Jim. He said he was just calling to talk. This had the hair on the back of my neck standing up, because I realized that he must have been the person who called looking for me yesterday. I told him that I can't just talk to people on the phone while I'm at work, and to not call here again. He said if I gave him my cell number, he could call me when I'm not at work and we could talk. I told him that I'm not interested again, and I hung up the phone. The supervisor, overhearing this, asked what had happened, and I explained what had happened at the Cherry Lane branch. She wrote up an incident report about everything, which he sent to the director of SRLS and the supervisors at all 4 branches. Friday afternoon, though, the director of SRLS called me at home. He told me that Jim had apparently called all 4 of the branches on Wednesday and showed up at one branch trying to find me, asking where and when I would be working next. The director emailed me a letter, drafted by the SRLS's lawyer, that he planned to send Jim and asked me to read it over to make sure everything was accurate. The letter summarized the incidents from Cherry Lane on Monday and Crestmont on Thursday, warned Jim that library patrons are not permitted to interfere with a library employee while she's performing her duties, and went on to say, "If it were not apparent from the employee's tone of voice, I want to make it clear that your personal attention directed at her is unwanted. It's expected that you will not continue to seek out interactions with this employee. All future interactions you have with library employees will be based upon library services and not become personal. Failure to comply will result in you being banned from the system for a period of time commensurate to your misconduct." I told the director that I thought this might be a little bit harsh. I could just be overreacting about the whole situation. But he said that everything about Jim's interactions with me had been inappropriate, and he wanted to put a stop to this right now. I agreed that he should send the letter. On Sunday, I worked at the West Valley Library. Shortly after the library opened, I answered a phone call, and it was Jim. I was shocked and scared, because I'd never told him that I worked at this library. He said that he really wanted to see me, and if I wouldn't talk on the phone, he would come to the library so we could talk in person. I wanted to be completely clear, so I told him that I was sorry if I gave him the wrong impression, but I wasn't interested in talking to him on the phone or in person, or ever again at all. He started yelling, saying things like, "I thought you were a good person. You seem so nice. You shouldn't treat me like this." I said I had to go and immediately hung up the phone. A coworker who overheard the conversation convinced me to file a police report just in case. The police arrived shortly after that, and I sat down with them and went over everything. They told me that they were going to stop by Jim's house the next day to speak with him about the situation and see where things stand. They told me that if I see him following me anywhere, I should call 911 immediately. Monday night, I worked at the Cherry Lane branch again. I was kind of nervous that Jim might come in since he knew I would be working there, and because he had probably just received a warning letter from my boss and a visit from the police. But he didn't show up. My coworkers and I walked to the staff parking lot together after closing, and as we approached our cars, I saw that my car's hood had been popped. We got closer, and I saw that all 4 windows plus the front and rear windshields had been smashed in. There were also dozens of deep dents to the metal panels, and cracks and holes punched through the bumpers and other plastic sections of my car. Inside, it looked like someone had poured bleach all over the black cloth seats. Before I could even process what I was looking at, my legs stopped supporting me. I collapsed onto the blacktop and immediately threw up. This is the first and only time in my life I've experienced actual panic. My coworkers hoisted me back up and dragged me back to the library where they called 911. When the police arrived, I told them about Jim. They located Jim's car several blocks away, and inside it they found empty bleach containers, a hammer, and a full set of his clothing: shoes, socks, pants, underwear, a shirt, and a sweater. When they visited his house, his wife told the police that he was at a local bar watching a football game. The police were never able to locate Jim, and as far as I understand, he never returned to his house or his wife. I didn't stick around to find out, though. Over the next 2 days, I quit both of my jobs, dropped out of school, broke my apartment lease, and moved several hundred miles away. But now I carry pepper spray. I'm a black belt in Krav Maga, and I don't run from threats anymore. Not long ago, my partner and I were driving through a reservation land at about 11 o'clock at night, in the desert southwest of the USA. We were on a major highway, but as with so many highways in that area, it's not very well used, just barely paved, and with only 1 lane going in each direction. No lights, just reflectors embedded in the pavement. It's not uncommon to go for an hour on this highway without ever seeing another vehicle. I was reading a book aloud when suddenly my buddy, who was driving, interrupts and pulls off on the side of the road, braking quickly. "Did you see that?" "No," I replied. "See what?" "That van, it just went off the road." I turned in my seat, but couldn't make out anything, on or off the road. It was just darkness all around. He grabbed the flashlight that we keep in the car and asked me to call 911 right away. He's in a medical profession and a lapsed licensed EMT, and I've worked in emergency response, so this isn't a super uncommon occurrence for us, although not even being able to see the accident was a first for me. I got on the phone with 911 immediately and set about trying to find a mile marker using my phone as a flashlight, eventually settling for giving them approximate GPS coordinates, as I had very little coverage and my GPS was acting flighty in that area. The dispatcher asked me to cross the highway carefully and try to ascertain the status of the passengers, since they had gone straight over a hill and presumably into the canyon below. I stayed on the line while I trudged over the sand dunes on the opposite side of the highway. I was a bit nervous to be walking this area in sandals, as we had just recently been discussing the rattlesnake population in the region. I couldn't really see where I was going and answer the dispatcher questions at the same time, but the scrubby vegetation gave me some purchase. Finally, I crested the largest dune, and I could see the outline of the accident site. On the road, the moonlight was blocked by the dunes, but on this side it was strangely bright. It took my brain a moment to make sense of what I was seeing. They had been lucky. The van had turned on its side and slid, and the friction from the dunes had just barely prevented the entire thing from going over the edge into the massive canyon below. My partner called out to me and asked me to check on the woman in the van, and I saw that next to him, standing with scarecrow-like stiffness, was a young man. He looked dazed and didn't seem to be answering any questions. I got the darkest vibe off of that guy that I've ever encountered. I felt goosebumps crawling up my back, and it was like there was a permanent ring of shadows around him. I felt very uneasy, knowing that either of us were anywhere near him, and made a point to keep visually checking up on them. I proceeded to the site and around the van, and called out to identify myself. I heard the voice of a woman inside, and as I walked around the windshield, I could see her. She was crouched in the passenger cabin, clearly in shock, her feet bleeding as she shifted back and forth in the broken glass of the driver's side window. A tall, willowy woman, thin and pale with dark hair. There was also a massive wolfhound panting. It appeared equally stunned. I saw that they had managed to pry the passenger side door open, and the man must have climbed out to the top that way. The woman spoke with me for a time, calmly and with an urgency I couldn't quite identify in her voice, and I relayed the information to the dispatcher. Yes, it was just the two of them. No, they don't seem to be seriously injured. Nobody had fallen asleep at the wheel. They were on their way to Texas to visit family. They were living out of the van. What I remember most clearly is that I made a couple of attempts to convince her to climb out of the roof or through the back to clear away from the van just to be safe, but she refused each time. She said that she didn't want to leave the dog. There was something wrong about her demeanor. People react differently to stress, and she seemed alert and competent, so I put it in the back of my mind. But I kept being struck by a strangeness in her handling of the situation. Dispatch and I agreed that the paramedics could probably easily break the windshield to free them, and there was no sign of fuel, so it was fine for her to stay in there until they arrived. And once I double-checked that she was secure and wasn't going anywhere, I handed off the phone to my partner while I went to wave out the paramedics. They had accidentally passed the site and were backing towards us from farther up the highway, looking for our flashlight thanks to the dispatcher. They pulled up a ways from the site, and I began to brief them. We all heard dispatch come over the radio. Please be advised that the male passenger is AMS and considered dangerous. AMS stands for Altered Mental Status, suggesting that someone isn't in the normal frame of mind for any variety of reasons. We all stopped in our tracks. The paramedics exchanged a glance, and one went back to the ambulance for additional equipment. I was eager to get back to my partner to make sure he hadn't communicated that to dispatch out of concern for his safety, but when we arrived on site, they were still talking quietly. I went to my car to find shoes for the woman. The passengers were placed in different ambulances, and the police arrived to take interviews all around. Just as we were about to leave, an officer taking our statements turned to us and says, "It's real messed up. I guess she was driving and he wanted to kill them both, so he grabbed the wheel and overpowered her. It's lucky either of them are alive." After a couple of hours, when we were back to driving, my partner proceeded to fill in the details. When he first got to the scene, the woman was yelling that he had tried to kill her and to please not leave her alone with him. She also said that if he got out, he needed to be restrained and that he was a danger to himself and others. The man was very eager to be let out of the vehicle. Bewildered, my partner had nonetheless helped the guy pry the door open, and once he was out, the guy had just clammed up and wouldn't do much more than nod or shake his head in response to anything. He kept fearing that the guy might take off and get lost in the desert, but in the end he had waited. He said the guy had seemed agitated, so he was doing his best to keep him engaged and distracted until help could arrive. It was chilling to realize that what we had thought was an accident was actually a murder-suicide attempt. I really wanted to accompany the woman to the hospital, but for unrelated reasons we couldn't remain. We went back that way during the day on a return trip a week later. We pulled over at the side and climbed over the dunes to see whether they had managed to tow the van over all that sand, and sure enough, it was gone. What was unnerving was the realization, upon seeing the landscape during the day, that if he had chosen any other spot to grab the wheel, for miles in both directions, they would have gone over the cliff almost instantly. In the dark, there was no way for him to tell, but he had chosen the only spot where they could have survived the incident. My partner then told me they had gone off the road when they were nearly opposite our little sedan on the highway. If the guy had opted for a head-on collision instead of the off-the-cliff option, we would have both been toast. It was a sobering thought. I think of the woman I met that night often, and of her wolfhound being gingerly coaxed into the back of the police car. I really hope that they're in a much better place now. As for the guy who tried to kill them all, I certainly hope that he gets the help he needs.
It was nearing Christmas of 2021, and by that I mean it was mid-November. I live in the United States, so Christmas and holiday items tend to go up as early as October. Being that I was at the time 16 and female, I always tried to get my shopping done early, because a lot of my gifts were handmade. For some background, there are a lot of shops, small grocery stores, and the local uptown within walking distance of my house. It was at the uptown where this occurred. One of my brothers, Anthony, was really into music and was learning different musical instruments, so I decided to go to this specific store in the uptown that sold musical supplies. Because of my schedule though, I wasn't able to go until well after 4, which was when the sun started to set. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have tried to go that late, but I was desperate enough to finish my gift shopping by the first week of December. I stopped at the local Dollar General to get some paint I run out of recently, then across the street to the uptown for Anthony's music supplies. While crossing the street though, I noticed a large brown truck stopped at the intersection. I hadn't seen a truck of that color in tow or ever before, so it was pretty noticeable. I also noticed that it was turning into the uptown parking lot the same as me. One thing about our uptown is that the majority of it is bars and restaurants, so there were quite a lot of people mingling around some of the bars. It did make me a bit nervous, but the music store was close by, so I decided it would be okay to just tough it out. As I was beginning to enter the store though, the brown truck slowly crept up by me. I was kinda spooked, but I figured whoever it was just being careful of all the people around. Unfortunately, the store did not end up having what I needed, so I placed an order for the following week and left the shop. By now, it was well into dusk. As soon as I left, I saw that same truck parked right outside the store. I brushed it off at first, thinking that maybe they were just in a store nearby and had gone to leave. As soon as I turned my back though, I saw the lights of the truck flick on and the engine roar to life. I basically peed myself right then and there. I turned to look at who was in the car, but the windows were so heavily tinted that I don't know how they were even able to see out of them. The car pulled out and slowly crept behind me. I felt like I was paralyzed. I figured I was going to be kidnapped and murdered right then and there. Thankfully, I found the nerve to run though when the car was about 6 feet away and booked it down the sidewalk. The car started to go faster to match pace with me, and the people from the bars didn't seem to notice or care. I was crying at this point. I didn't know what to do. That's when I saw my saving grace. I saw 2 ladies a little bit younger than my mom sitting outside a coffee shop that had just closed. They spotted me, and I took a chance to run up to them and explain the situation. The pink shirt coffee lady had to leave, but gave the key to the lady in the blue shirt, who offered to let me stay inside the cafe until my mom could come get me. The brown truck drove past over and over, but eventually gave up and left the way it had come. My mom showed up several minutes later. I thanked the blue coffee lady for her help, and I still frequent their shop quite regularly. I'm very thankful to those coffee ladies because they probably saved my life that night. This experience is the reason why I'm so deathly afraid of intruders breaking into my home. I was 10 years old at the time this happened, and it was summer break just after finishing 5th grade. I think it was maybe the 2nd or 3rd week of June. I don't really remember why, but my mom had to go to a dinner with some of her coworkers from the daycare she worked at one night. She left my older sister, who was only 12 years old, to watch over me. My older sister, though, was more so there to make sure the house didn't burn down rather than watch over me. That night, my mom left for the dinner and said she would be right back. I remember I was in the living room, and my older sister was upstairs in her room. I was also downstairs with Fenrir, who was a black Newfoundland that I grew up with my entire life. Unfortunately, by the time I was 10, he was already showing his age. He couldn't walk, run, or even stand up like he used to. We would usually have to help him get up and walk him outside to the backyard, which had a porch. The porch had this walkway we had built, so that Fenrir could walk down easier. We would also have to bring his food and water bowls over to him, as he was always too tired to even get up. So there I am, watching TV in the living room with Fenrir lying down on the side of the couch. Suddenly, though, I hear this loud growling. I muted the TV and turned around, and saw Fenrir was now growling and snarling at something. He then started barking too. I looked over to see what it was, and saw he was directing his attention at the back door that led to the backyard. I couldn't see anything outside though, as it was pitch black out. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Fenrir just stood up with seemingly little to no effort, violently growling, snarling, and barking. Keep in mind, he hadn't been able to get up by himself in a long time. Seeing him stand up like he was a young dog again scared the shit out of me. I used to say that it was almost as if he'd gotten possessed in that moment. Still, he was directing his attention to that back door. Before I even had the chance to react, Fenrir suddenly jogged over to the back door, got up on his hind legs, and started scratching at the glass that was on the door. At first, I thought that perhaps a squirrel had gotten up onto the porch and walked up to the door. But then I remembered that Fenrir wasn't even this aggressive towards squirrels. When he would see one when he was younger, he would bark and chase at it, yes, but it was more so to scare it off rather than actually hurt it. And to add to that, Fenrir was not even an aggressive dog. He was always so sweet to people and other pets, and usually so calm. To see him going feral, it sounded like he wanted to kill something. I finally walked over to the back door that Fenrir had been clawing at. I sort of pushed him out of the way, surprised that he didn't snap at me with all his growling. I decided to put my face up against the glass to peek out and see if anything was there, but I still couldn't see anything. All the while, Fenrir was still scratching, growling, barking, and now even baring his teeth and drooling to my right. I then walked to the right where he was, where there was a light switch that turned on the porch lights. Fenrir went back to his spot. Then I flipped on the light switch. The second that happened, I saw a man dressed in all black, the classic burglar outfit, with gloves, a ski mask, and everything. At first, he was seemingly looking into the door, with his hands and face pressed up right against it. When I turned on the lights, he got startled and stumbled a few steps back. He then turned over to me, and it was like time was frozen in place. We were both just staring at each other for more than a few seconds. Me, being only 10 and not really knowing what to do, I quickly reached out to the knob of one of the back doors, more specifically the door that Fenrir was still scratching at, and swung it wide open. The guy tried to run away, but Fenrir was right on top of him. He wasn't even able to make it off the porch before Fenrir latched onto him, and when I say latch, I mean he latched on. He bit down on the guy's leg, then moved to biting down hard on the guy's arm. The guy tried to hit Fenrir off of him, but he was just not able to. I was just frozen, staring at my dog really biting down on this guy. To be honest, I was more so scared of my own dog than the guy who was trying to break in, since I'd never seen him be this aggressive in my entire life. I actually thought he was going to straight up kill the guy. Eventually, due to the guy's screams of agony and despair, I guess this caused my sister to run downstairs to see what was going on. I'm not really sure why she didn't come down earlier when Fenrir was growling and barking the first time, but I digress. When my older sister saw what was happening, she freaked out and called 911. Then she told me to go to my bedroom, which was also upstairs, so I did. I ran up to my bedroom and just stayed there, in shock of what I had just seen and the whole situation in general. A while later, the police showed up and my mom eventually showed up too. She burst through my bedroom and gave me the tightest bear hug I'd ever gotten from her. I remember she was crying fiercely, worried sick I'd been hurt. While I was shaken up, though, I had not been physically harmed. At one point, I finally went downstairs. I saw my older sister talking to an officer, while Fenrir was lying down next to her covered in blood, almost like Cujo. I remember thinking, oh my god, he just killed somebody. I also remembered that when I put my face up against the glass on one of the back doors to see what Fenrir was so pissed off at, I had most likely put my face directly up to where the guy still had his face pressed against on the other side. So I'd made indirect eye contact with this guy before I turned the lights on, without even knowing how close we were. Thankfully, while the guy did lose quite a lot of blood, he did not die. To be completely honest, I don't really know what happened to the guy afterwards, other than that he got arrested. My mom was instantly looking into buying a new house and moving, and we all eventually moved when I was maybe 11 or 12. Unfortunately, before that, first I had developed my intense fear of dealing with intruders. So much so that I could never look outside windows when it was pitch black outside for a while, because I was afraid of seeing a face right there. Second, a few months before we moved, we had to finally put Fenrir down, because he was just too old now. Needless to say that 2014 was the year my childhood and innocence died. I'm 18 years old now, and I've since been better about looking outside windows when it's dark outside. While I'm still afraid of intruders, it's not really as bad as it used to be. When I move out, I'm thinking of getting a big dog of my own. I'll be forever thankful to Fenrir, though. Had it not been for him, who knows what that guy could have done to either me or my older sister. I've been in therapy ever since this happened. I sleep with a gun next to my bed now, the lights on, and I cannot be home alone. Here's what happened to me on May 23rd, 2017. In my neighborhood, we had a few burglaries. I work from home, and I'm usually home alone with my son as well. We live near a busy mall, and our neighborhood, even though in a pretty good area, is close to highways and has 3 ungated entrances. It makes it easy for people to break in, steal, and get out before police can arrive. I also scare pretty easily, so hearing an alarm going off nearby or seeing the police helicopter circle above and having the neighborhood swarm with cop cars always freaks me out. For a while, we had a spree of guys going into unlocked cars and stealing stuff. I mention this because there were about 25 cars they were able to get into. Our area was the kind where you could kind of leave your door open and usually nothing would happen. At this point, it was really just petty theft. Nothing major was ever stolen and no one had ever been hurt. Needless to say, for the next few months we all felt very pissed and really violated by what had been happening. Homeowners meetings were packed and everyone wanted to put a stop to the crime going on in our neighborhood. It was soon revealed a rental property in the hood was the home to a drug dealer who was dealing more than just weed. He was selling some hardcore stuff, and it was thought that a lot of the crimes stemmed from that house. They had undercover cop cars throughout the neighborhood, just waiting to make a bust. Up till this point, it was pretty scary, but from a far-away point of view. Also, at this point, no one was getting hurt, at least not physically. Our neighborhood watch sent information to make sure alarms are on, windows and doors are locked, and if a car was in the driveway, more than likely burglars would skip your home. Just remember to lock your car doors. Well, since I work from home, my car was always in the driveway. One afternoon in April, my son and I were on a walk. It was a nice day, and about 2 blocks from our house, the cop cars came rushing in. I was told to get back to my house as soon as possible. An officer actually escorted us to our door and let me know to lock every door and window. Turned out there were 3 armed assailants on the run between my street and the next. They broke into 2 houses. In one, a woman was home alone. The 3 men assaulted her, tied her up, and left her for dead. They broke into a second home as well and pistol whipped a man that was home. The next week, a woman was nearly kidnapped on a 6 a.m. run on my street. The fear was real at this point. Going out alone during the day or night was just not happening, and none of these criminals have been caught either. Then things died down for a while. Usually every couple days there was a break-in, but there was nothing after this in early April. In late May, I had to take my car into the dealership for some work. I was left without a car for about 2 days. To keep my son busy, we would go on long walks to the mall with 2 other moms and their kids in the morning, then go swimming in our pool in the afternoon. A lot of the stay-at-homes grouped together because of fear of the recent goings-on. This particular day, it was actually very nice out, so I had all of our sliding glass doors open, and I was letting the house air out. While I was bathing my son though, I suddenly got a very funny feeling, so I rushed and locked all the doors and blinds as quickly as possible. Even though it was our backyard, I didn't feel safe leaving those doors open, with me down the hall in a bathroom. Just as I was walking away from the last door, I saw 2 large men entering my backyard on our security camera in the kitchen. We have 3 stations in our house where you see the feed from the cameras inside and outside. One in our bedroom, one in the office, and one in the kitchen. My husband does security systems, so he set us up with the most elaborate and expensive unit. We had 2 padlocks on the gate already, so I was pretty freaked out that they had managed to get in. These men were big guys too, at least 6 foot and around 220 pounds give or take. I'm 5'3" and 140. I'm not exactly tiny, but I'm not a match for someone who's that huge either. The guys were trying to look in through all the windows, so I edged back into the bathroom and realized I'd left my cell phone outside by the pool. I couldn't call anyone or get attention from outside my house. All I had was my work phone in the office that needed to be booted up to be used. I was on vacation for the week too, so the system was shut down for that entire time. I grabbed my son, his diaper bag, and made our way into the office. The room was pretty soundproof. You'd have to be screaming full stop for it to be heard outside. It also had access to security cameras, where you could actually hear audio from the cameras, and it has a heavy-duty lock on the door as well. My husband had set it up after that sexual assault so that it could be a panic room if we ever needed it. It was hidden in our garage, so unless you turned on all the lights in there, you'd have to walk around his tool bench and a high shelf. If you were not looking, you might not even realize there was a room there. My son thankfully fell asleep on the rug in the room. As I was freaking out watching these guys, they used a little hammer to break the sliding glass door to enter my bedroom. At this point, I was getting my computer started up to call the police. Once they were inside, I was only able to see them in the living room, kitchen, and my son's room. They were going into all 5 bedrooms in my house, rummaging through closets and drawers. The larger of the 2 men walked into the living room. He had my cell phone in his hand and literally looked at the camera in the living room and waved it around. He then opened his bag, pulled out a knife, rope, and duct tape, and what I later found out were condoms. "Hey, pretty mommy, where you hiding? We want to have some fun with you." I realize now these guys weren't here just to steal stuff. Thankfully, I was finally able to call the cops. They told me to stay secured in the room, turn off the lights, stay on the line, be as quiet as possible. These guys were tearing my house apart, calling out my name, looking for me. They even started calling my son's name. This part freaked me out. Just how the fuck did they know our names? One of the assholes even started eating the chicken I'd just baked for dinner. They were rummaging through my laundry room, and one of them grabbed a pair of dirty underwear and inhaled deeply. It was the most disgusting thing I'd ever witnessed, and I was just praying they wouldn't find us. They made their way into the garage, and were looking around everywhere. I could only see a little portion of this from the kitchen camera now. I was praying they didn't turn on the lights to see the entrance to the office in the corner of the garage. I was whispering into the phone, keeping the dispatcher up to date on what I was seeing in our security feed. She told me the cops were 4 minutes out. The assholes were now rummaging through the garage. I heard them playing around with my husband's power tools. My son woke up and thankfully didn't start crying. Instead, he quietly looked at me and began sucking his thumb. I knew what these jackasses had in mind for me, but I was scared to think what they were going to do to my son. That single thought brings me to tears, even as I recount the situation to tell it. I brought my son into the closet of the room with a flashlight, bottle, and blanket, and I mouthed for him to be quiet and shut the door. The dispatcher told me the cops were now 3 minutes out. Her name was Janice. I begged her to tell them to hurry up. She told me to keep calm and that she was there with me. She recommended I get in the closet as well. I didn't because I didn't want them to think about my son if they broke through the door. Then I heard them start pounding on the office door. These guys were pulling at it, and it sounded like they were throwing their entire weight into the door. I could hear my husband power saw. At this point, the bigger guy screams, "Bitch, I know you and the baby are in here. We're here to fuck you up. You should have just come out when we came in." I was literally shaking and praying the door and lock would hold up. I moved a dresser in front of the door. No idea why I did that, but I'd seen them do it in movies before. Then I pushed the futon in the room against the dresser, just praying the weight was enough to keep them out. I told the dispatcher what was going on. She told me the cops were through my front picture window. I look at the security system, and sure enough, it looks like 4 or 5 cops had just arrived at my door. The rest was a blur. I felt like it was taking forever with all the noises of taking the guys down. Then there was just silence. I was sobbing and rocking in the dark with my son in my arms. He sat there quietly hugging me and patting my back. Soon I heard a knock on the door. It was a female officer. It took me a moment to open the door, and I didn't even realize I still had Janice on the phone with me. The guys were arrested. They were caught with large amounts of cocaine, meth, and roofies on them. It seems they had broken into the drug dealer's house before they broke into mine. The cops later disclosed that they had been watching me and stalking me for a few weeks. They knew I was home all along, and I was just the next victim on their list. Thank God they didn't get to me, because I have no idea if I would still be here to tell this story. We actually were able to sell our house 2 months ago, and we moved out of state. Our new hood has a gated entrance. My house has security cameras in every room, and I have a gate around the entire property as well.
I worked at a local government agency for a long time. Each summer we would get a new crop of interns. Most were fine. Some caused issues, like when we caught 2 of them making out in the file room. Overall, they were just normal kids from high school or college, trying to get some work experience. In 2016, my department received an intern later than usual, right in the middle of the summer. Warner was a bit older than the usual crowd, around my age, maybe in his late 20s. We initially hit it off pretty well, and although I found him sort of strange, I didn't mind since he was friendly and we shared common interests. He was the only person in my department who was even close to my age. The interns were all teenagers, and the regular staff averaged around 60, older than my mom. I was psyched to have a peer to chat with, so occasionally I would eat lunch with Warner or stop to talk at his cubicle. His strangeness was mostly an outsized personality, a mix of over-the-top enthusiasm with a bit of social awkwardness. I got 0 bad vibes from the guy. It wasn't long, though, before Warner started having major performance problems at work. He would produce little to no work on most days, no show or arrive late without informing anyone, and generally acted pretty unprofessionally. One day he showed up for work at 3:15, when our workday ended at 4:30. The office manager was livid and told him to go home. His behavior bothered nearly everyone in my office, but I didn't supervise him, and we had plenty of slacker interns in the past. While his antics were a bit of a spectacle, it wasn't a big deal to me. If you're wondering why he wasn't let go, 2 words: political favor. I found out from Warner himself that he was hired because his uncle donated to the campaign of our big boss. He wasn't going anywhere. Near the end of the summer, I put in my notice that I was leaving my job and relocating to a new state. Once Warner caught wind of this, he would constantly complain that it sucked I was leaving, because we barely had time to become friends. I would always laugh lightly in response and give a sympathetic yeah. He would start to monopolize my time at work more and more, and it became disruptive to the people who sat near to me. I found it slightly annoying, but I was also extremely happy to be leaving that job for reasons unrelated to Warner, and I spent my last month there not caring much about what my coworkers thought. I tolerated him lingering by my desk. One day he caught me leaving work and offered me a ride home. I usually took the bus, and occasionally other coworkers would offer me rides home if they were going my way, so this didn't seem odd to me. I accepted and walked to his car with him. It smelled awful and was full of garbage. He hastily cleared off the passenger seat and apologized. We got on our way, but once we were on the main road, he started begging me to stop and get dinner with him. I laughed and said he didn't need to ask me that insistently, and said we could stop at a diner along the way. We had a nice meal with pleasant conversation. He was intelligent and had a variety of interests. Our political positions aligned, and we shared disdain for our cranky old coworkers. I had a good time. I expressed that he didn't need to drive me all the way home now that it was late, but he kept insisting, so I relented. As I directed him towards my house, he started in again with the whining about how our developing friendship was cut short because I was moving. At this point, I was getting tired of hearing this. The decision to leave my job and move away from home was an extremely difficult one to make, and I was proud of how bold I was being. I stopped responding and laughing, and his whining eventually faded out. We came up to the turn to get onto my street, and when I pointed it out, he accelerated and drove right past it, laughing. I laughed in an OMG what the fuck kind of way, thinking he was just joking around. When I began giving him instructions about how to turn around and get back, though, he started begging me to keep hanging out with him because he was lonely. This immediately set me on high alert. It suddenly hit me that I'm in a man's car, someone I don't know that well, who doesn't exercise proper behavior at work, which is the only context I know him in. Now he's displaying weird behavior outside of work as well. My instinct was to not insist to be let out of his car. I felt as if this would escalate the situation into something bad, and in hindsight, it might have been the right thing to do when I think about the type of person he turned out to be. I told him we could hang out in the park near my house if he wanted to talk. He seemed to like that idea, and we parked and walked over. The pleasant conversations resumed. Besides the weird clinginess, he was perfectly fine to talk to, until he started dumping his entire life story onto me, including his prior arrests for theft, his heroin addiction, and his struggles with depression. I tried to be sympathetic, but I was very put off by this. It was a lot of highly personal information at once, and I was still on alert because of his prior behavior. I tried changing the subject by showing him pictures of my dog. I scrolled one pic too far, and the next one was a photo of me wearing makeup and posing cutely, way different than the slob I was at work. He grabbed the phone from me and said, "Wow, you're very photogenic." I felt awkward and didn't say anything. There was a long silence before he launched into a weird tangent, going on about how compatible we are, that we have similar interests, and that he wishes I wasn't moving so we could try hanging out again, but on a date. I didn't say anything, so he broke the silence with, "Sorry I'm saying all of this stuff. I'm actually pretty high right now. And that's why I know where Riverside is. I went there yesterday to buy, otherwise I wouldn't have said it. Sorry." Internally, I freaked out. He had definitely put his drug addiction in the past tense, and I assumed it was something he was recovering from, not currently using. I also realized I had been in the car he was operating while he was under the influence. I don't know anything about heroin, so I was clueless, but I felt very, very stupid. He immediately started whining and begging me not to judge him or hate him, and kept saying over and over again how nice I am, how understanding I am, that I'm pretty and smart. All of these weird compliments interspersed while talking about himself. I didn't know what to do. I smiled reassuringly and told him not to worry, but that I was tired and wanted to go home. That's when he started bursting out crying. He had this weird wheezy sob, but no tears were coming out. I sat there quietly while he did this, trying to come up with some sort of graceful escape plan. My patience was wearing thin, and my anxiety was starting to get through the roof. It's a weird feeling to be annoyed and panicky at the same time. I stood up and apologized, said the park was close to my house so I'd walk, and started to leave when I remembered I left my stuff in his car. Trying a new approach, I casually mentioned I forgot my stuff in his car, and joked that if he wanted my dirty lunch containers, he could keep them. He ceased his bizarre crying, stood up and ran over to his car to unlock it, and I grabbed my stuff out of his back seat. His demeanor changed drastically, as he calmly apologized for making things weird, and asked if he could drop me off at home so I didn't have to walk alone at night. I said yes, but I made him drop me off a block from my little side street, so he didn't know which house was mine. I could end it there, but what bothered me the most about this guy happened after this encounter. I'll make this part sort of short. A week or two after that weird evening, end of August by this point, I had my last day at the job and moved 1,000 miles across the country. Warner would sometimes text me long ramblings detailing his feelings about himself and about our missed opportunity. I didn't respond to any of these messages. Now that I wasn't near him, I didn't feel the need to placate. The text stopped after a few weeks, and I forgot about him. Fast forward to February, and I get a text from a former coworker. Her message said, "Sorry you had to hear about it this way." Next to her message was a link to a local news article titled, "Man Dies from Wounds in Riverside Stabbing, Wednesday." Because of the way she worded it, I had thought Warner was the victim, but when I read the article, it included his mugshot in the charges. He was the attacker. He murdered someone. And I felt so shocked and disgusted. I couldn't believe I knew someone who had killed another human being. Later on, I called an old work friend for some details. Apparently, shortly after I left the job, he was fired for trashing the men's room. He threw around anything he could lift and poured all the soap out and smeared it all over the place. He then lost his apartment. I have to assume that's how he ended up in the aforementioned Riverside. There are a lot of homeless drug addicts who squat in abandoned houses. I wondered if the man he had stabbed had refused to give him something he wanted, and that's how he reacted to a hard no. I don't think I made all of the wisest decisions during my interactions with Warner, but I'm glad I was able to avoid setting him off. He was clearly not stable. So this happened on Halloween when I was about 11. My friend and I decided to go trick-or-treating. Yeah, we were a little old, but we just wanted some free candy. I lived in a very nice neighborhood, one of the ones where everyone gives out the full-size candy bars, so it wasn't unusual to have a lot of people come there to trick-or-treat. However, that also meant that there's about an acre of front yard for each house, so it took about 3 minutes to walk between each door. It was a good night for Halloween weather-wise. Not too chilly and not too rainy or anything. This is important later. It's approaching 8:30 p.m. at this point, and after hanging around on the golf course and appreciating our candy haul, we decide to start heading home and call it a night. The street I live on is a gigantic U-shape. A little over half a mile walk from the top of the U down the bend to the other side. We were walking towards the end of the U further away from my house, as we wanted to take the long way since it was such a nice night out. It's about 9 p.m. now, so no one else is really out anymore at this point. The people have all turned off their porch lights, the universal signal for no more trick-or-treaters. That's when we notice a lone white van parked on the street. We made a joke about how it looks like the stereotypical kidnap vans, even with painted windows. That's when we notice it shift out of park and slowly creep down the street towards us and park at the next house. Oh, they must have kids trick-or-treating or something. It wasn't uncommon for people to drive their kids from house to house, since they were so spread out in our neighborhood. But given that it was 9 p.m. and a night with nice weather, it struck us as a bit odd. We checked every few minutes, and it seemed to just be stopping from house to house like normal. We turned around again and kept walking at a leisurely pace, gossiping and whatnot. And that's when we hear the car squeal as it moved forward down the hill and park again, this time only about 2 houses away from us, on the opposite side of the street. Again, that's some weird trick-or-treating, but whatever. That's when we realized that there were no kids getting out of the van. Not even once. Now this was before my first phone, a red and white Samsung Propel, since it was 2008. We were only 15 minutes from my house, but a bit disturbed, so we walked to the nearest door, rang the bell, and stuck our bags out in an attempt to act normal. A woman opens the door just a crack, and proceeds to berate us for trying to trick-or-treat at this hour. She slams the door before we could even get a word in. Okay, thanks, lady. We turn around, and the van is right there, parked in the wrong direction, on our side of the street. The windows are fully tinted, so we can't even see inside to see the man driving. Trying to keep our cool, we casually walk away from the door and up the street, into this cul-de-sac loop that's on the side of the street that makes up the bigger U. If you cut through that loop and hop a couple of fences, you can end up at my back door. The van goes the same way. Now we know for sure they're following us, since there's no reason to ever go up this side street otherwise. We break into a sprint, and I'm by no means athletic, but I hop those damn fences like an Olympian. We run inside my house, lock all the doors, and freak out while we sit in the front hall. Not 5 minutes later, the van slowly drives down the street, right past my house. We stress-eat our candy, and think about what could have happened if we hadn't been aware of our surroundings. A little background about me. I have PD, panic disorder. For those who don't know what it is, it's a mental illness that causes extreme anxiety, severe panic attacks, and a slew of other problems. I've been suffering from this for over a year now, and while it's finally getting better, it's been very difficult to deal with, so keep this in mind. My husband and I have been married for a little over a year now. The time we were married, unfortunately, I was undergoing medical issues that no doctors could seem to explain. I was having panic attacks all the time, and they would be so severe I would have to be taken to the ER, where they would have to sedate me to calm me down. I was also losing weight at an exponential and scary rate, becoming sicker and sicker as time went on. Not even a month after we married, I lost my job and was homebound, while my husband worked second shift, which was 4 p.m. to 3 a.m. He would arrive at home around 4 a.m., leaving me home alone most of the time. My parents and younger brother lived close by, perhaps a 10-minute drive at most, but at the moment my mother, who is a school teacher, and my father, who works in a factory, were unable to watch over me. They called as frequently as they could, but that was about all they could do. In May, I was told by doctors that I was literally at death's door, and unless something happened quick, my family was going to lose me. I was given medications to help with panic attacks and to get me to eat. They wanted to hospitalize me, but I refused. My parents decided that when they and my younger brother went to Florida the next month, they were taking me with them. Again, keep in mind I'm both anxious and extremely sick. Around this time is when my real issues began. Not with me, but with our neighbors. See, we've never actually met our neighbors personally. My husband lived in the trailer for a month on his own before we married, and he always said they were a bit odd but didn't seem to be of any concern. However, once I came into the picture, that all changed. The person who lived in the trailer before us was actually a cousin of mine, who rented from another cousin and his wife who lived states away. Nora was a huge druggie and a drug dealer, so people got used to getting their fixes and drugs at the trailer we now live in. Then, a few months before we moved in, she got in trouble with the law and landed in jail for some time. I guess our neighbors, who according to our landlords were drug addicts and raging alcoholics as well, thought that perhaps maybe she was back. I'm not quite sure. I suppose this is because from where I was so sick, and my husband slept when he could from both working odd hours and taking care of me, so they never actually saw us. They just knew someone was there. They became active mostly at night. During the day, they were predominantly quiet. Every once in a while, they would do something outside, but for the most part, nothing really happened. It was always after my husband left for work. My car was still there, which should have told him at least someone was still home. It started off innocently enough. Driving up and down in front of the house, parking in the road directly in front of it and waiting. They'd honk the horn, but I'd ignore them. Several times I called my parents, asking them what I should do. They said for the time to just ignore them, because maybe they thought Nora was back, and after some time they'd get the hint that it was new people and leave me alone. I did just that, for a time. When they started driving up the driveway and stopping at the porch, that's when I first called the cops. All I was told was that as long as they didn't encroach on my actual property, there was nothing they could do. They advised me to turn on the lights to my house, signaling I was home. I couldn't sleep, despite desperately needing to. I had mono and panic disorder / depression, so I needed to sleep. My husband had the weekends off, and you can guess it, no issues during the weekends. It was insane and infuriating. Everyone believed me when I said I was having problems, but there was only so much they could do. My father-in-law brought over one of his shotguns, a 12-gauge, knowing that I was a fairly decent shot. He told me to use it if need be. Another background thing is that I shot trap for years, and when I was 18 I placed second in districts. I chose not to go to state, but knowing I was good enough for second was a proud moment for me. My father-in-law made me promise I would use it if it came to it, so I did. One night my husband was at work, and I guess my body had finally shut off. I fell asleep for once, only to be woken up at around 1 a.m. by the sound of our neighbor's truck tearing out from behind the trailer. I jumped up, looked outside, to see them driving out of our driveway. They started speeding up and down in front of the house, and I called the cops again. I called my mom and my dad. My dad came over because I was in full panic attack. My dad called my husband, who came home immediately. There were tire marks in the grass behind the trailer, but they couldn't prove it was them, despite me describing their truck down to each and every dent. My dad told the cops this had been going on long enough, but again, not enough evidence or proof. A week. Just one more week until I could go with my family to Florida. I somehow managed to be a bridesmaid in my older brother's wedding, despite being so sick. I was doped up on medications to keep me calm, so I wouldn't have a panic attack, and to be honest, I don't recall much about the day other than it poured rain. My husband, naturally, was at work. I was sitting at home, our 2 cats asleep rather soundly. I was playing my 3DS with Markiplier on the TV for background noise, the time around midnight, when my cats suddenly sprang awake and became unglued. They ran to the side door, Then the front door, growling and hissing, their hair on end. They had never behaved that way, so I started to get up to see what it was they were freaking out about, when I heard it. How are we gonna do this? I froze. I heard them. I heard their footsteps as they walked up and down the front porch. I wasn't sure how many they were, but I know for a fact there were at least 3 men outside. My curtains were closed, and most of the lights were off, but the TV was on, and surely they could hear Markiplier's eccentric volume. Maybe I'm not... They had gotten quieter. I heard their footsteps on the porch again. I grabbed my phone, shakily swiping until I found my dad's number and called him. I remember breathing hard, feeling a panic attack setting in. Hello? They're here, I remember sobbing. On the porch. Daddy, they want to get in. I'm on my way. Call the cops. I hung up with them, then heard them talking amongst themselves about how they wanted to break in, what they wanted. I ran into the bedroom, grabbed the 12 gauge, opened the chamber to see it fully loaded, and called the cops. I left the lights off. I decided I was going to have them caught this time. I wasn't going to run them off. The dispatch answered, and I told him what was going on. As sick as I was, I managed to hold that shotgun to my shoulder, pointed at the door, remembering everything my dad taught me about shooting while I was a hunter and when I shot trap. But I was still scared out of my mind. Somehow I kept my panic attack down for now, but I was still breathing very hard. Calm your breathing, hun. You said they're outside? Yes. I heard one say they heard me, and the other said that it wouldn't be a problem. Oh my God. They're coming, I promise. I'm armed. Excuse me? I'm armed, I yelled, hoping that they'd hear. With what, sweetheart? A 12 gauge. They want to hurt me, and I'm not going to let them. She's armed, I heard him tell the police, who I suppose were on their way. I heard armed from one of the guys outside, and then complete silence. I heard their footsteps leaving, then saw the lights on my dad's truck. I lowered the shotgun and ran outside, my dad and younger brother running out of the truck. My dad had the Judge in his hand, which is a pistol that shoots 12 gauge rounds, while my younger brother was holding a knife. It's my dad and brother. They're armed too. Okay, what of the men? I don't see them anymore. When the cops get there, disarm yourselves, okay? I thanked the dispatcher for everything, and at about this time the cops pulled up. I told my dad and younger brother to disarm, so they put their weapons in the truck while I took my gun inside and sat it on the kitchen, on top of our counter table. My dad told me to get back in the house, and for my younger brother to go with me. As soon as I stepped inside, the panic attack hit. My dad came inside for a moment and hugged me, telling me how brave I had been, especially for holding it in as long as I did. Shaking, crying, and gasping for breath, I listened as he went back outside. The cops found footprints and an area on the porch where the men had tried to break in at one point. The men had scattered, though, leaving it difficult for the cops to trace exactly where they came from. My dad told them it was the neighbors. My landlords actually called and told the cops it was more than likely our neighbors as well, who had apparently been giving my cousin who lives up the road a difficult time as well. The cops noticed some of the footprints went into the neighbor's yard, but they weren't home, of course. I remember my dad and younger brother standing outside just as the cops pulled up, yelling as loudly as they could that they would drop them if they ever so much as saw them around me again. Enough is enough, my dad yelled over and over. She's sick. She needs rest, so leave her the hell alone. I noticed that he was crying. My dad isn't the type of person to do that. My whole life, I've seen my dad cry maybe a handful of times. When he talked about his deceased father, when my mom's mom died, when the doctors told me I was on death's door, when my younger brother was born. My dad had been scared that he wouldn't get there in time, and maybe, just maybe, that I would hesitate to protect myself. But I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let them get away with it anymore. That night, my husband came home from work and hugged me so tightly, I thought my lungs might burst. My younger brother texted him what was going on, but reassured him that I was okay. A week later, I went to Florida. Time went on, and I'm still getting better. As for my neighbors, I never had problems from them again. I'm not sure if it was the cops actually going to their house, or if it was my dad and younger brother threatening them. Or maybe it was me, them hearing me saying that I was armed. I don't know, and I don't care. They're still there, but I know they won't try anything with me ever again.